Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where you live on frozen dirt, sleep beside cows, and pray you don't wake up with your hair literally stuck to the wall. We're exploring why medieval winters were brutal, not in a forgot my gloves way, but in a you might not survive this week kind of way. You'll feel the chill in your toes, the hunger in your belly, and the very real threat of death by winter sniffles. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to picture your little sleepy setup. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the single-room hovel you call home. And I use the word home generously. There's no floor, just packed earth and manure, frozen as solid as your breath. Your bare feet are raw from yesterday's snowmelt creeping in through the wall's gaps. This isn't a storm shelter or emergency survival hut. This is your everyday, your year-round base of operations, and now it's deep winter. The dirt beneath your feet isn't just dirt, it's a grimy blend of trampled straw, ash, scraps, and let's not lie, animal waste. That's not metaphor. In many medieval peasant homes, the pig literally lived inside with the family. Why? Because pigs generate heat. And because if you left it outside, wolves or bandits would enjoy your bacon long before spring. So you walk on filth, and you sleep on it too. Beds? Forget it. Maybe a lumpy straw sack in the corner, likely crawling with lice. For most, there's no raised surface, no mattress, just bodies huddled together under scratchy wool, using body heat and sheer desperation to keep death at bay. If you had some coins, sure, maybe there's a wooden pallet. But those were luxury items, and honestly, wood was better used for fire or tools. Not comfort. And even if you did somehow scrape together a wooden plank to sleep on, congrats, your backside is now a chilled slab of salted meat on a medieval cutting board. No insulation. No padding. Just hard, freezing discomfort, all night long. The walls around you are wattle and daub, woven sticks covered in clay and straw. Not bad, really, but they shift with the seasons, crack in the frost, and let the wind whisper through the seams like a nosy ghost. Sometimes snow even blows inside. You grab a chunk of wall where moisture has frozen in a rickety little rift, and it crumbles under your fingers. Hope you didn't like that part of the wall. Time to stuff it with hay again. Oh, and the ceiling? Smoke-stained beams, dripping with centuries of soot and melted fat. Maybe a thatched roof if you're lucky. Maybe just planks with gaps you've jammed with moss. Rain leaks. Snow melts. Rats party in the rafters. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants really lived with animals year-round or only during the worst weeks of winter, but the archaeological evidence points to shared quarters being depressingly common. Especially among the poor. Because let's face it, you couldn't afford to waste body heat. Or risk losing your only milk goat to the elements. And speaking of goats, there's probably one curled up near the hearth, giving you that sideways goat eye look as if to say, your turn to bring in the firewood. Now, you might think, why not just build better homes? More stone? More insulation? The problem wasn't ignorance. It was resources. Stone costs money. Timber needs land and permission. You build with what's around, and in winter, what's around is usually freezing, damp, and trying to kill you. Heating? We'll get to that. For now, your only reliable warmth is from the hearth in the middle of the room, a low-burning fire that doesn't quite reach your extremities. You can feel your fingertips buzzing with pins and needles from how cold they are, and you haven't even stepped outside yet. And yes, the fire is smoky. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof, and hopefully it's not clogged. If it is, the smoke stays in and your lungs take the punishment. One of the most common indoor health hazards in the medieval world? Smoke inhalation. You'd think living outdoors would be healthier, but not if the indoors is filled with literal smog. As the fire sputters, you crouch beside it, turning your hands over the coals. Someone next to you shifts under the shared blanket and mutters in their sleep. That's your uncle. Or maybe the neighbor. There's no privacy. One room. One family. One cow. You look down at your foot and realize it's turning a bit blue. Not ideal. Maybe some frost nip? You shove it back toward the embers and wonder if your toes will all make it to Easter. And before you ask, yes, people absolutely lost toes, fingers, and even noses to frostbite. Some wore foot wrappings soaked in animal fat to create a sort of DIY insulation. Did it help? Slightly. But mostly it just made you smell like roasted pig feet. There's a peculiar comfort in routine, though. Every morning you wake up with a scratchy throat, stiff joints, and the dread of having to move, again, in the cold. But you also wake up alive. And in this era, that's not nothing. One quirky tidbit, some communities actually believed that sleeping too warmly would make you sick. So even if you had access to thicker furs, you might not use them for fear of encouraging bad humors to stew inside you. That's right, you could freeze while following medical advice. Medieval life was basically a series of bad Yelp reviews for staying alive. As you shift your weight and hear the straw crunch beneath you, you catch a whiff of ammonia. That's either your toddler's late-night accident or the pig. Maybe both. But it's your life, and you carry on, trudging toward another morning on frozen earth, waiting for a sun that barely shows itself, and even when it does, it mocks you with a cold blue light. You squint up at the ceiling where your breath has formed tiny ice crystals that now glitter like stars. Almost beautiful. Almost. You pull the ragged cloth tighter around your shoulders and shuffle toward the wall, where a draft has started whistling through your only window. And you use that word loosely. This isn't a glass pane, not even a crude one. It's a hole. An honest-to-goodness rectangular void in the wall, patched with oiled linen or a stretched pig bladder. You poke at the edge, and it flaps inward, sending a puff of freezing wind into your already numb face. Windows were a luxury in the medieval world. Real ones, made of glass, were reserved for the very rich, aristocrats, high-ranking clergy, or maybe a prosperous merchant who wanted to show off to the neighbors. You get the upgraded meat-wrap version, translucent at best, vaguely sticky, and deeply unsettling when the wind presses it inward like a curious ghost. The air leaking through is merciless. It's not just the temperature, it's the texture. Sharp, damp, and sour, like it's been fermented in a troll's laundry basket. Outside, snow piles up against the thatch like it's trying to bury you out of pity. Every now and then, a brittle crack sounds from the beams above, and you half expect the roof to cave under the weight of the latest snowstorm. You wedge a bit of wool into the window frame, hoping to stem the chill. It doesn't help. The wind finds every crack, every nail hole, every whisper of space between the sticks and daub. Your house breathes like a dying animal, cold in, colder out. The only time you're grateful for the window is when the hearth smoke refuses to leave. If your rooftop smoke hole is clogged or iced over, the smoke has to go somewhere, and sometimes it reluctantly leaks through this hide-covered hole like a frustrated sigh. Otherwise, the air inside turns into a medieval fog machine, and you're coughing on half-burnt straw fumes until your eyes water. Some wealthier homes, particularly manor houses or monasteries, used horn in their windows. Yes, thin slices of polished animal horn, translucent like weird bone jelly. Let in light? Sure. Let in views? Absolutely not. You could see vague shapes and blurs, but no detail. It was less like having a window and more like watching the outside world through spoiled soup. Historians still argue whether the average medieval peasant even wanted a window. After all, windows meant weakness in the wall structure, more drafts, and more opportunity for thieves, wolves, or the neighbor's goat to stick its head in. Better to patch it up with mud and pretend the sun doesn't exist for 3 months. But let's say you did have a small glass pane. Some early ones did exist, especially in monasteries or noble homes. These were thick, greenish, wavy glass circles, sometimes called bullseye panes. They were uneven, distorted, and barely transparent. You couldn't really see through them, but you could tell if it was day or night, which honestly might be enough for this time of year. As you peer out through your version of a window, currently fogged up with your breath, you can make out shapes trudging through the snow. That's old Edric dragging firewood on a sled. He's wrapped in what appears to be 6 cloaks and 2 sacks, and still looks like he's losing the fight against the wind. Behind him, his youngest is carrying a bundle of sticks larger than her torso. You wave, but she doesn't see. Or maybe she's frozen solid. Hard to tell. Inside your home, the window hole becomes more than just a poor excuse for daylight. It's how you check the weather, which is mostly cold or worse cold. It's how you hear the church bell calling for morning prayers, or get the first warning cry when wolves get too close. And, let's be honest, it's how you keep tabs on whether the neighbor's sheep have wandered into your yard again. One fringe tidbit you'd never expect: some medieval folks believed that night air coming through a window could cause disease. Not germs, because that idea hadn't shown up yet, but miasma, or bad air. So at night, even in a smoky, airless room, many people would seal off the window hole entirely, believing it was safer to choke on your own fireplace than risk the mysterious and evil cold that seeped in from the stars. Of course, you can't blame them. Your cousin died last winter after sleeping near an open window with his mouth open. No one really knows why. Maybe it was pneumonia, maybe just bad luck. But now everyone agrees, don't sleep with your face toward the pig bladder. In wealthier places like castles or monasteries, window coverings could be more elaborate. Wooden shutters on hinges, for instance, though they still let in air around the edges. Tapestries, sometimes nailed to the wall, were used as draft barriers. And in cities, some homes had sliding wooden slats, or even waxed paper over latticework. But out here, in the frozen ribs of the countryside? You're lucky if the curtain doesn't fall down when the wind blows. The most maddening part? The light. You crave it. Winter days are short, and even when the sun rises, it limps weakly across the sky, barely giving enough illumination to stitch a hole in your tunic or see your own fingers. The window hole barely helps. So you sit near it during the brightest hours of the day, huddled and motionless like a sun-deprived mushroom, trying to feel something in your soul besides frost. And when the snow starts again, as it does almost every evening this time of year, you hear it first, a hissing against the wall, then the soft patter of flakes landing on your windowsill and sneaking in. You grab another rag to stuff into the frame. Maybe tomorrow you'll line it with sheep dung for extra insulation. You've heard it works. You sigh, adjust the cloth around your face, and gaze out at a world turned white, where the silence is so heavy it feels like wool on your shoulders. And in that moment, you realize the window isn't just a weak spot, it's your only glimpse of life beyond the walls. A blurry, frigid invitation to a world you're not sure is safer than the room you're in. Still, it beats getting kicked by the goat again. You haven't truly known chaos until you've tried to sleep through a medieval winter night, with 5 other people, a goat, and at least one rodent squeaking from the corner. You're buried under every blanket, wool scrap, and possibly an old curtain you could find, breathing into your cupped hands as your nose threatens to detach and go live somewhere warmer. But still, you can't fall asleep, not all at once, at least. Because in this era, no one sleeps straight through the night. You sleep in shifts, and not by choice. Medieval folks didn't tuck in for a single, uninterrupted 8-hour stretch. The common sleep pattern, especially in winter, was segmented. Historians call it biphasic sleep, and it meant you'd drift off early in the evening, wake again around midnight for an hour or two, then fall back into a second sleep until dawn. Sound relaxing? It wasn't. The first sleep starts as soon as darkness wins the sky. That's usually not long after supper, if you even had supper. Hunger helps you fall asleep fast, but cold makes it shallow. You curl near the hearth, wrapped in your one tunic, listening to the creak of beans expanding in the cold and the faint bleating of livestock shifting in the dark. Then, like clockwork, you wake up. Not fully, not comfortably. Just enough to feel like your dreams got kicked out of your brain by a wet shoe. And what do you do with this first waking? If you're lucky, nothing. Just lie still and try to remember that nice dream where you owned 2 loaves of bread. But more often, this was the hour of quiet chores and whispered prayers. Some people stirred the fire, added more wood if they had any, or checked on the animals. Couples might, snuggle. Others used this time to pray, journal, if literate, or even go visit a neighbor to share stories. Yes, visits at midnight. Before modern clocks, people lived by rhythms instead of minutes, and this was simply the middle of the night. Open scholarly debate still exists over why this segmented sleep evolved. Was it natural, based on light cycles? Or was it enforced by the conditions, cold, discomfort, noise? Either way, you do what everyone else does, wait for your second sleep to arrive like a clumsy horse. You shift your position, trying to find a pocket of warmth in the bedding. It's communal, by the way. You, your siblings, and at least one uncle are all mashed together under the same rough wool. Clothes on, obviously. No one's stripping for bed unless they want to wake up looking like a popsicle. And if you think you're uncomfortable, just remember the pig curled up beside your youngest brother is probably the warmest body in the room. Privacy? Gone. Snoring? Constant. The room smells like feet, hay, and something vaguely sour, possibly cheese. Possibly not cheese. You don't want to know. And let's not forget the lice. They love warm bodies, and now you've conveniently gathered several into one writhing cocoon. Every so often, someone stirs, scratches, mutters in a half-dream about firewood or saints, and flops back into their damp corner of the mattress. One quirky tidbit, there were actual sleep charms to help with the night's rest. People might hang herbs like lavender or rosemary near the bed. Some even tucked sprigs of St. John's wort under their pillow to ward off nightmares, which they believed were sent by evil spirits or mischievous elves. Yes, delves. And not the nice Christmas kind. Sometimes, if the moonlight is strong, you might catch glimpses of the room around you during your midnight wakefulness. It's like living inside a smoky shadow box, figures curled in strange shapes, soft snores and the crackle of dying embers. It should feel peaceful. It doesn't. You know you'll be up before long, trudging outside to relieve yourself in the snow. We'll talk about that soon enough. But for now, you wait. You pray that second sleep returns. Because the alternative is lying here, eyes wide open, counting rat squeaks and trying not to think about how cold your nose has gotten. Sleep disorders weren't recognized the way we know them today, but oh, did they exist? Night terrors? Blamed on sin or spirits? Sleepwalking? Possibly demonic possession? Insomnia? Probably your fault for not confessing something. The medieval world was quick to pin sleeplessness on morality. No pressure, right? Back in your shared bed, you finally feel yourself slipping again into the soft, sour warmth of second sleep. It comes slower, heavier, like dragging a blanket of fog over your mind. The noises fade. The goat stops chewing. You almost forget the frostbite nibbling at your left heel. Dreams in the second sleep were sometimes viewed as divine. People kept track of them, shared them, believed they held messages. Your dream? You're inside a warm bathhouse, eating roasted apples, wearing boots that fit. Pure fantasy. You wake with the taste of ash in your mouth and realize your cousin drooled on your arm. Again. One more fringe idea, some monks tried to skip second sleep entirely. They believed the wakeful hours were best used in holy contemplation, reading, or silent prayer. Which sounds noble, until you try to pray at 2 a.m. in an unheated stone cell while your fingers go numb and your candle gutters out mid-hymn. Eventually, as a pale light returns to the sky, the room begins to stir. Not because anyone feels rested, but because the chickens outside won't shut up and someone has already stepped on your foot while getting up to poke the fire. Morning isn't a gentle friend, it's a rude guest kicking your ribs. You sit up slowly, wrapped in the same clothes you slept in, because taking them off would be absurd. The air in the room has barely shifted. Your breath still clouds. Your joints crack like frozen branches. And yet, somehow, you survived another segmented night. One down. Only about 90 more to go until spring. You wake up with your water frozen solid. Not cool room cold. Not fridge chilled. Rock hard. The clay jug beside your bed is now a miniature iceberg exhibit, complete with frostbite potential and the vague sense that someone should be charging admission. You give it a little shake. No slosh. Just a dull thunk. Welcome to the medieval morning ice ritual. This isn't a one-off inconvenience. It's every morning from late November to, well, whenever the sun decides to grow a spine again. You look at your breath, puffing visibly in front of your face, and briefly entertain the fantasy of lighting the entire house on fire just to feel your fingers again. You'd be cold 5 minutes later, but at least you'd be warm once. Your hair is frozen too. Not in a snow angel cute, Elsa from Frozen way, or more like you slept too close to the wall and now your head is literally stuck to it. Medieval bedrooms weren't rooms at all, remember? Just corners of open space with a bit of cloth and prayer. And walls? They're damp, porous, and in winter they sweat ice. You roll your head gently, trying not to leave a tuft behind. Then comes the ritual of unstiffening. Every joint feels like it belongs to a different person, possibly one who died last week. Your knees argue with your ankles. Your fingers refuse to bend until they've hovered near the hearth like marshmallows for at least 10 minutes. You wince as the blood comes back. Congratulations, it burns now. You're awake. You toss aside your sleeping rags and stagger upright. If you're in a luckier household, maybe a yeoman's family, you've got a brazier of coals still smouldering from last night. But more likely, the hearth has gone cold. The fire is dead. And with it, the only real hope for a comfortable morning. You kneel down and start poking through ash, searching for a rebellious ember that dared to survive the night. Spoiler, it didn't. Time to restart it. You reach for the flint and steel. A few sparks fly, pitiful little things that wouldn't light a paper towel, let alone damp straw. You mutter a few creative medieval curses under your breath and keep striking. Eventually, miracle of miracles, smoke curls upward. You coax it. You whisper to it. You blow until your lips go numb. And finally, a flicker of flame. A tiny sun in a world of snow. Now comes your reward, tepid water, if any. You bring the frozen jug close and hover it awkwardly near the fire, trying to thaw just enough to drink. You watch the surface slowly shift from opaque to glossy, like the jug itself is trying to remember what being a liquid felt like. Don't even think about bathing with it, baths are a luxury for spring or saints. The idea of hot water? Reserved for monasteries and nobles. And even then, you'd need to haul bucket after bucket from the well, heat them over an open flame, and carry them one at a time to a wooden tub in a room that's still below freezing. So unless someone has died, given birth, or caught something contagious enough to terrify the priest, no one's drawing a bath this month. But back to the water, now semi-liquid, still tasting faintly of smoke and clay. You sip. It's a temperature best described as despair. Still, it helps loosen your throat, parched from a night of mouth breathing in Arctic air. You glance outside through your sad excuse for a window. Snow. Of course. You can hear the creak of ice-laden trees and the occasional thump of something falling off the roof. Probably a squirrel. Possibly a shingle. Fun fact, in some regions, people left their shoes upside down or hanging on pegs overnight to prevent rats from nesting inside them for warmth. You check yours, which were thawing near the fire, and shake them twice, just in case. A rat in your shoe would be annoying. A frozen rat? Now that's a health hazard and a mood killer. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages truly had a morning routine as we know it, like set hours for rising, breakfast, or hygiene, or if it was more reactive, wake when the cold slaps you, move when someone yells, eat when there's something to gnaw. In winter, it leans heavily toward the latter. Your day doesn't start so much as ambush you. You turn to your family's shared water barrel. It, too, has frozen over. You chip at the top layer with the back of a spoon. Or a knife. Or a sharp stick. Depends on what you can find that isn't currently doubling as firewood. You break through, and there's that satisfying crack, like splitting a frozen pond, but in miniature. You're very proud. No one claps. There's one silver lining, frozen water means fewer insects. No flies, no mosquitoes, no lice parties, well, fewer lice parties. The downside? Everything else is worse. The cold seeps into your teeth. Your nose hairs freeze when you step outside. Your fingernails feel like glass. And if you don't warm your boots by the fire before putting them on, your toes will regret it within seconds. Another quirky note? Some folks used to believe that collecting ice or snow for drinking was dangerous. Not because of bacteria, but because it was unnatural. Frozen water hadn't passed through the warmth of God's sun, they said. Which is poetic, if utterly inconvenient. So instead, you're supposed to melt it and bless it. You do neither. You're too cold to be that spiritual this morning. And then, just as you start feeling something like circulation returning to your limbs, your little brother, who apparently has nerves of steel, kicks snow through the door as he runs out to the latrine. You want to scold him, but your lips are frozen mid-grimace. You'll save the yelling for later. Still, there's a quiet rhythm to the morning. Fire rekindled, water sipped, boots half-thawed. You sit near the hearth, steam curling off your shoulders as the last of the night's cold releases its grip. Outside, the light strengthens, pale and wintry, but welcome. You survived the freeze again. You brush a chunk of frost off your sleeve and tell yourself spring is only a few months away. You're wrong. But it helps. So now you're awake, semi-thawed, and vaguely aware of your surroundings. The fire's been bullied back to life, the water's no longer solid, and your feet are inside your boots, if by inside, we agree that circulation is optional. You stretch, groaning like a rusty hinge, and realize it's time for one of the most dreaded parts of a medieval winter day, going to the bathroom. You glance toward the door and sigh. You really don't want to go out there. Because here's the thing, your bathroom isn't attached to your house. It isn't even near your house. It's a drafty little outhouse, or more likely, a rickety wooden box across the yard that's one gust away from becoming a pile of timber. It's possibly shared with your neighbors. It definitely smells like it's haunted. You wrap a cloak around yourself, grab a torch if you're fancy, or brave the dark if you're not, and begin the slippery walk through snow-packed mud. Every step is a crunchy gamble. And if you think this is a quick trip, think again. The cold makes you hesitant, the wind makes you weep, and the outhouse itself? It's a test of character. The seat is a wooden plank with a hole. It's barely wide enough. It's splintered. It's freezing. I mean glacier-grade freezing. You hover awkwardly, mentally preparing for what may be the least dignified 10 seconds of your life. This is, of course, assuming you have an outhouse. Many peasant homes, especially the poorest, relied on the good old chamber pot. Basically, a portable toilet bowl, often stored under the bed or beside the hearth. Great for midnight emergencies. Horrifying in the morning. You lift the lid and instantly regret your existence. The pot is full. And it's slushy. You try to carry it outside without spilling. You fail. You spill a little. You hate everything. Where does it go? You toss the contents into a designated trench or midden heap behind the house. In winter, these heaps freeze into grisly little icebergs, waiting patiently for spring to melt them back into a swamp of regret. One fun, quirky tradition in some towns was the honey wagon, a cart that collected night soil from wealthier households. But out in the country? That job is your job. You, your slop bucket, and a deep sense of humility. Don't worry, by the time you're back inside, you'll have lost all feeling in your fingers, but gained a new appreciation for indoor plumbing. Historians still argue whether people in medieval Europe truly minded the stench and inconvenience of outdoor toilets. Some sources suggest they were so used to it, they didn't notice. Others say winter was actually preferable, because everything froze solid and didn't smell as much. So, silver linings. Still, even monasteries, those paragons of discipline, struggled with the cold and the call of nature. Some used lavatoriums built over running water, but even these could freeze. Imagine trying to focus on prayer while your holy posterior is hovering above a half-frozen stream. You return to your house with a new understanding of pain. The kind that comes from contact with wood that's been left outside all night in -10 degrees Celsius. The kind that stays with you, emotionally. Back inside, people are moving about now. Someone's stoking the fire again. Your aunt is muttering about someone leaving the door open too long. Your older brother is trying to warm his hands by sticking them in the goat's fur. It's not working. You glance at the chamber pot, now empty and rinsed with snow. You'll be repeating this ritual before bed, and probably in the middle of the night too. Better get used to it. You'd think wealth might spare you from this misery. And yes, castles had guardrobes, those vertical shafts built into the stone walls, often protruding slightly, sometimes even suspended over rivers. But they weren't exactly cozy either. Imagine sitting on stone in the middle of a blizzard, with no door behind you and birds nesting in the chute below. Also, the smell didn't just vanish. In fact, some guardrobes vented directly into courtyards, which made castle life less majestic and more airborne tragedy. Let's not forget the risk. In freezing weather, the shaft of a guardrobe could ice up, causing backups. And yes, there are stories, true or not, of unfortunate individuals slipping and falling into the muck below. The medieval equivalent of a bathroom horror story. For most people, though, it was the cold that made nature's call so unbearable. You start timing your bathroom trips with the sun, trying to go during the warmest moment of the day. Spoiler, there isn't one. It's all just varying shades of misery. Sometimes you'd have to wait. Wait until it wasn't so dark, or so windy, or until your mother had finished yelling at the dog. You'd try to ignore the discomfort. You'd distract yourself. You'd fail. Eventually, you'd break and make the journey again, like a frostbitten Sisyphus of sanitation. On very bad days, like when you're sick or it's storming, you might not go out at all. You just use the chamber pot and push it into a corner like it's time out. It judges you silently from under the bed. In wealthier homes, you might get a padded seat or even a close stool, a wooden box with a chamber pot hidden inside, topped with a cushion. Fancy. But still frozen. Still slushy. You sit now, back near the fire, cloak steaming slightly, pondering the indignity of it all. You look at the youngest child in the room, snoozing with their head on a sack of oats, and wonder if they'll grow up to invent indoor plumbing. You send them a mental nudge, do it. Save us all. But for now, the routine holds. Chamber pots are emptied. Outhouses are braved. And everyone pretends that tomorrow will be warmer, that spring will come, that someday, people won't have to walk barefoot through snow just to pee. You sip your smoke-flavored water and try not to think about the next trip. The fire has settled into a lazy crackle, casting flickering shadows across the frostbitten walls. Your feet are still numb, your hair's still damp from the melted ice crystals you scraped off earlier, and now it's time to face the next insult of the day, breakfast. You brace yourself. Because you know what's coming. It's gruel. Again. You pull yourself over to the hearth, where a battered pot hangs above the embers. Inside, a bubbling greyish slop simmers with the enthusiasm of wet cardboard. This is pottage, a medieval breakfast champion. Made from oats, barley, maybe some millet if you're feeling fancy. If yesterday was lucky, there's a lump or two of dried turnip in there. If yesterday was really lucky, it tastes faintly of meat. Though, knowing your luck, that's probably just soot. You ladle a scoop into a cracked wooden bowl and watch it slop like half-melted glue. This is the food that fuels an entire population. The stuff that keeps people walking, working, and occasionally, not dying. Gruel, for the uninitiated, is basically grain boiled in water until it gives up on having texture. In winter, it's a godsend because it's hot, it's filling, and, most importantly, it's cheap. You can cook a lot of it in one go, reheat it, stretch it with water, and reuse the same spoon for a week if no one's looking. You sip it slowly. It's still a little too hot, and now the tip of your tongue is slightly blistered. Your cousin chuckles through a mouthful of his own. You're not speaking to him anymore. There's a bit of ash in yours. From the fire. Probably. Not worth fishing out. Historians still argue whether medieval diets were nutritionally sufficient, especially in the winter months. Some say peasants got more fiber and fewer processed foods than we do now. Others point out the lack of variety, vitamins, and, joy. Especially during the Hungry Gap, those bleak weeks in late winter when food stores ran low, but spring crops hadn't yet arrived. And while your modern brain may scream add sugar, or where's the protein, those options don't exist. Sugar is rare and absurdly expensive, only the rich use it, and mostly to show off. Honey might be around, but no one wastes it on porridge. It's for medicine, rituals, or royal desserts, not your morning sadness bowl. For protein, you're on thin ice. Maybe there's a bit of salted pork or lard saved from last fall, but it's likely locked away until feast days. Which is hilarious, since winter in the medieval calendar looks like feast season, Christmas, Epiphany, Candlemas, but if you're poor, it's mostly symbolic. You'll get a little dried fish on religious days. Some dried peas, if lucky. But mostly? Gruel. Sometimes, for a treat, you sprinkle salt on top. If you have salt. If not, you might stir in the heel of a stale loaf or last week's bone broth, now congealed into a mysterious gelatin with a top layer that jiggles when you breathe too close. Quirky fact, in colder regions, people sometimes stirred a chunk of animal fat or beef tallow into their porridge, creating what's best described as savory oatmeal for survival. The fat gave energy, sure, but also coated your lips in a shiny layer of grease that never truly left. And you weren't eating alone. Oh no. You're sitting shoulder to shoulder with your family and, if your house is generous, maybe a stray neighbor or laborer. Everyone eats from their own bowl if you have enough. Otherwise? Communal pot. Communal spoon. Try not to double dip or start a fight over the lone beet chunk floating like a hero in the middle. Also, let's be honest, hygiene is not winning awards here. No one washed their hands before breakfast. No one washed anything. If the bowl isn't moldy, you're ahead. You wipe it clean with a bit of straw or a corner of your tunic. It's fine. Bacteria builds character. And as you eat, the conversation is minimal. Not because it's a meditative family moment, but because everyone's mouth is busy trying to not complain. That's the true rule of winter breakfast, don't waste energy on whining. You'll need every calorie just to get through the next few hours. Your uncle mentions the firewood pile is running low. Your aunt mutters that the last hen laid no eggs. Your brother brags that he saw a fox and threw a stone at it. No one listens. Now and then, someone stands to scrape the last dregs from the pot, scraping with enthusiasm that borders on violence. The bottom is burned, of course. You chew through the black bits anyway. They're crunchy. Kind of smoky. You pretend it's seasoning. Sometimes, as a fringe tradition in certain villages, people sang while stirring the breakfast pot, soft little rhymes about warmth and full bellies, meant to bring luck. You don't sing. You glare at your gruel and dare it to be satisfying. Outside, the day's work waits. Snow to be shoveled, fences to be checked, animals to be fed. You take one last slurp, now lukewarm and slightly congealed, and set your bowl aside. One fun side note, archaeologists have found medieval bowls with tiny personal carvings on them, little symbols or initials scratched in the clay. Why? Because when the gruel's all the same, you need something to make your bowl feel special. You glance down at yours. No mark. Just a chip where someone dropped it last week. You use it anyway. You rise from the hearth, rubbing your hands on your thighs for warmth. The pot is empty. The fire is tired. Your stomach is full enough. And you tell yourself, maybe we'll have eggs tomorrow. You're wrong. Again. You're laid up like a cabbage, if cabbages were itchy, musty, and vaguely damp from yesterday's snow. You've just finished your breakfast of despair and now it's time to get dressed for the day. Not that there's much to put on. You slept in most of your clothes already. But now you add the real armor, wool. All of it. Even the underwear. Layer 1 is your linen shift, the only garment in your wardrobe that might be clean. Not is, might be. It's thin, barely warmer than paper, and responsible for keeping the outer layers from rubbing you raw. Then come the hose, thick woolen leggings that only go up to mid-thigh and are secured with string or, if you're fancy, little garters. They itch. Constantly. If they didn't itch, you'd wonder what was wrong. Next, your tunic. Or if you're lucky, 2 tunics. The inner one's darker with mysterious stains you've given up identifying. The outer is made of heavier wool, rough enough to exfoliate your soul. It smells like smoke, sweat, and winter. In medieval terms, that's just called clothing. And yes, even your underthings, if you're wearing any, are wool. There's no cotton. Not here. That's a foreign luxury item. Linen is the closest you get to soft, and you only have so much of it. You wouldn't waste linen on drawers unless you were extremely rich or terminally rash-prone. If you're heading outside, and let's face it, you add a cloak. Thick, heavy, fastened with a brooch or a knot at the shoulder. It flaps in the wind like a cape, but don't get heroic about it. It's there to keep snow off your neck, not to make you look like a knight. The boots? Oh, the boots. Leather, if you're lucky. Stuffed with straw if you're desperate. No insulation. Just hope. And sometimes, small rodents. You stamp your foot once or twice before sliding it in, just to make sure no one's napping in there. You wrap your head in a wool coif or hood, not for style, but because ears are a luxury your village can't afford to lose to frostbite. And maybe, just maybe, you add gloves. Wool mittens, fingerless scraps, or the ever-popular sleeves pulled over your hands until they're unusable. Now that you're fully dressed, you're also fully stiff. You walk like someone wearing a quilted coffin. Every step creaks. Every movement reminds you that comfort is for summer, and personal space is a modern invention. Historians still argue whether people wore the same set of clothes every day during winter. Spoiler, they did. Laundry wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Wet clothing froze stiff, and trying to wash something meant exposing yourself to water, cold, and possible public nudity. The trifecta of medieval humiliation. Instead, clothes were worn again and again, patched until they were more thread than fabric, and often repaired with bits of fur, canvas, or even rope. Smell was inevitable. Your best hope? Smoke. Hang your tunic near the fire, and it absorbs enough wood smoke to temporarily outscent your armpits. A rustic cologne. A quirky tidbit from some parts of medieval Europe, people believed that wearing red wool in winter protected you from illness. Something about heat in the blood. So if you see someone walking around dressed like a tomato, don't judge, they're just trying not to die. Fashion wasn't really the point. Clothes were tools. Layers equaled life. That green overdress your aunt wears every day? It used to be your grandmother's. That cloak with the wolf-tooth clasp? It was stolen off a corpse in the last famine winter. Every garment has a backstory, and none of them are cheerful. You look around your home and see your family going through the same routine. Your brother is trying to relace his shoes without snapping the string. Your sister is wrapping rags around her hands because her mittens burned last week in a fire-related cheese accident. No one looks warm. Everyone looks like they wish they were warm. And don't think you get to remove these layers once you're inside somewhere else. Churches, workshops, barns, they're all as cold as your house. Sometimes colder. You'll sit through an entire sermon, teeth chattering, dressed like a sheep impersonating a human, while the priest drones on about spiritual warmth. You're not buying it. Your nose is actively dripping. Sometimes you catch a break. Maybe someone's woven fur trim into their cloak, or lined the inside with rabbit pelts. But fur's expensive, and in winter, animals are too valuable alive. So unless you're high status, you wear wool. Only wool. And lots of it. Wool gets wet. It stays wet. It smells like regret. But it's everywhere. Blankets, cloaks, hoods, hose, gloves. Wool is the medieval MVP. And yes, you sleep in it too. You don't undress. There's no changing into pajamas. You just collapse into the straw, still dressed like a damp shepherd, and hope tomorrow is slightly less terrible. One fringe tip? Some people warmed stones by the fire and wrapped them in cloth to hold under their cloaks. A primitive hot water bottle. You've done it. It worked for about 4 minutes. Then the stone cooled and you cried a little. You pull your cloak tighter and head outside, crunching through last night's snow. You can't bend your knees properly. Your mittens have stiffened in the cold. And the wind grabs your hood like it's trying to snatch your soul. But you're dressed. You're protected. You're still cold. But slightly less doomed. You tell yourself it's not so bad. It is. You squint into the dark. Not because your eyes are bad, but because the only light in the entire house is a single stub of tallow candle sputtering by the hearth, and it's barely holding it together. The flame dances like it knows it's on borrowed time. You try not to breathe too close, or the whole room might go dark. Welcome to medieval lighting, where illumination is reserved for people with money, or people okay with the smell of cooked sheep fat. You'd think, given the whole world filled with darkness and danger thing, people would have put more effort into lighting. But candles were expensive. Oil was even pricier. Firewood was precious. And the sun had already noped out of your part of the world by 4 p.m. So now? You rely on a sad, drippy candle made from tallow, the rendered fat of livestock, usually sheep or cows. And it smells exactly like you think it would. You're sitting next to it, trying to mend a torn sleeve, but you can barely see the needle, let alone the hole. The flame gives off more shadow than light, wobbling as you exhale too close. There's soot gathering on the wall, a black smear above the makeshift sconce. It looks like the room's been crying for years. If you're especially poor, which, let's face it, you don't even have tallow. You use rushlights, dried reeds dipped in grease, jammed into iron holders. They burn fast, flicker hard, and occasionally spit little flaming blobs across the room. It's a lighting solution and a fire hazard, all in one charming package. Historians still argue over how widespread candle usage really was among the lower classes. Some say peasants used them only for emergencies, relying mostly on moonlight or nothing at all. Others believe that in winter, when daylight hours were painfully short, even the poor had to prioritize at least some artificial light. Either way, it wasn't like flipping a switch. If you lit a candle, you were on a timer, and everyone in the room knew it. And let's not forget, candles weren't exactly mass-produced. You or someone in your village had to make them by hand. Collect the fat, strain it, melt it, dip the wick repeatedly until a stub formed, and try not to drop it in the straw. Then, dry it. Store it. Try not to let the dog eat it. That's a full day's work for one night's glue mitigation. Oil lamps? That's adorable. Those were for monasteries, high-end homes, and the kind of people who had money to import oil. Your house doesn't even have a proper glass window, and you think you're getting olive oil light shows? Get real. One quirky little workaround, people sometimes filled clay bowls with leftover fat and floated a bit of twisted cloth as a wick. Crude, but functional. Just don't move too fast near it, or you'll end up wearing your lighting system on your tunic. Now, over in the castle, oh, they're glowing. Beeswax candles, baby. Smooth, slow burning, and fragrant. They smell like honey and cleanliness. The kind of candle that says, I don't share my bed with a pig. Monasteries loved beeswax, too. It burned cleaner, less soot, better for reading. But it was expensive. A full beeswax candle could cost more than your week's food. That's why the church got it, and you got something that smells like stewed lamb armpits. One candle in a dark room changes everything, though. You huddle close to it. You catch glimpses of your family's faces, half-lit and ghostly. Your cousin looks like a character in a tragic shadow play. Your father's beard is lit from below, transforming him into a wizard who knows exactly how cold it is outside. And when the candle burns low, when the stub finally snuffs out with a last defiant hiss, you don't light another. You wait. You sit in the dark. Sometimes, if the moon is out, its cold light creeps through your window blanket and casts a soft glow across the floor. It's bluish and watery, like moonlight filtered through disappointment. But it's still better than nothing. No one's doing embroidery or reading manuscripts in this light. You're lucky if you can see your own feet. You rely on memory, routine, and a good sense of where the goat's been lying so you don't step in something warm. One strange detail, it was common to go to bed shortly after nightfall in winter, partly because of the cold, partly because of the dark, but also because what else were you going to do? You couldn't stay up late binge-watching tapestries. So, sleep became a survival tactic. The less time you spent awake, the less time you spent burning through resources. Still, light held symbolic power. Candles were lit for saints, for the dying, for rituals and feasts. On holy days, even the poorest homes might use up precious wax or tallow to make the night feel less eternal. A single candle on the winter solstice? That was a promise, spring would come again. Eventually. For now, though, you sit in the gloom. You can barely see the walls, and the fire's down to glowing coals. Someone coughs. Someone farts. The darkness eats it all. And just when you're about to call it a night, your younger sibling suggests lighting another candle. You all look at each other, then at the dwindling stash in the corner. You tell them, no. We need those for when it gets cold. They blink. But it's already cold. Exactly. You sit in the candlelit dark, contemplating the last edible lump of barley in your teeth, when the church bell tolls. Once, twice, then it keeps going. You lose count somewhere around 10. Not because the bell's too loud, but because it's hard to focus when the wind keeps sneaking under the door like it's got a personal vendetta. The sound echoes across the village, bouncing off snowy roofs and cold stone walls, reminding you, and everyone else, that winter isn't just a season. It's a spiritual timeout. Because according to the church, winter is for chilling. In every sense. You think Lent is strict? Try medieval Advent. Or Ember Days. Or literally any Friday between November and February. The calendar is stuffed with fast days, scent days, and days where eating joy is a sin. The rules don't just discourage parties, they make you feel guilty for thinking about parties. This morning, your mother reminds you that today's a meatless day. Again. That's the third one this week. You stare at your chunk of pottage with mild betrayal. The chunk of pork from last month is still hanging in the rafters, drying like a forgotten shoe, but you're not allowed to touch it. Church says no. God says no. Everyone says no, except your stomach. Fasting is cleansing, your grandmother whispers from her corner. You're pretty sure she says that whenever someone complains, and also when she's hoarding beans under her cloak. The medieval church didn't just shape your soul, it shaped your schedule. Daily routines weren't driven by sunlight or workload, but by sacred rhythms, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nones, vespers, and compline. That's right, your day is divided like a monk's planner. And each part comes with bells. Loud, clanging, freezing cold bells that cut through sleep, silence, or your one moment of bathroom peace. Historians still argue whether rural peasants actually kept to these canonical hours, or just vaguely acknowledged them while trying not to die of exposure. Monasteries? Yes. Townsfolk? Maybe. But peasants? You're out here worrying more about frostbite than vespers. Still, the church's grip was tight. It told you what to eat, and when not to, what to wear, modestly, and what to think when winter dragged your mood into the frozen basement. Feeling sluggish, sad, or sleepy? That's sloth. Sinful. Better get outside and work, even if your fingertips turn blue. The whole winter was essentially a long, mandatory introspection session. Cold days? Pray more. Long nights? Pray harder. Get caught singing something too cheerful during a fast period? Someone's going to tell the priest. Now, not every part of winter was grim theology. There were holy days like Christmas and Epiphany, full of ritual and symbolism. But even those were religious first, festive second. Christmas feasts existed, sure, but you had to get through 4 weeks of Advent first, with minimal indulgence. That means you arrive at Christmas already exhausted, a little underfed, and emotionally prepared to enjoy a plate of dried fish under a crucifix. One quirky bit? Some churches put on morality plays during winter nights. Locals would gather in a cold hall and watch villagers reenact biblical stories, dressed in sheets and occasionally wielding turnips as props. It wasn't Hollywood, but it passed the time. Sometimes, they were even unintentionally funny, like the time your cousin forgot his line and shouted, "Repent, or face the cabbage." Music? Very limited. Chanting was fine. Lute playing, if samba, might slide. But joyful noise? Out. Unless it was a sanctioned feast, and even then, there were limits. You weren't allowed to dance during certain seasons. Yes, dancing. Illegal on some days. So if your feet got the urge, you'd better channel it into woodchopping. The church wasn't cruel, it was trying to keep people focused, especially during the hardest season. Winter was dangerous. Death was everywhere. So you were reminded, day and night, that this life was temporary, and heaven wasn't heated either. In noble households, winter meant confession marathons and long sessions with the family chaplain. Imagine sitting in a freezing hall while your dad sobs about the time he accidentally stole a monk's pig and swore in front of a tapestry. Now imagine doing that every week. But there were small rebellions. You remember the old widow down the road who always smiled too much during fasts? Who claimed her soup was just turnip water, even though it smelled suspiciously like bacon. She'd wink at you as you passed, ladle in hand, daring anyone to say she was sinning. And then there's your family's secret stash, a jar of honey tucked in the rafters. Reserved for special nights, like tonight. It's your brother's name day, and even though you're not supposed to celebrate loudly, there'll be a hush-hush bite of sweet oat cake after Compline. Your mother's already whispered the plan, wrapped it in ritual, made it feel like magic. It's not defiance, it's faith-adjacent resilience. You sit quietly now, listening to the bell wind down. The house has gone still. Your sister is humming, too softly to count as joy. Your uncle is carving a spoon, slowly, reverently, like it's a prayer. Outside, snowflakes drift down like soft ashes. The wind has paused. Just for a minute, the world feels almost kind. But you know the bell will ring again tomorrow. Same message, stay humble. Stay cold. And maybe, just maybe, stay alive. You lean against the wall, catching your breath after hauling a frozen bucket of water from the well, and glance at the only source of consistent warmth in your life, the family cow. She's huddled near the hearth, steaming gently, snorting into the hay like she owns the place, and to be fair, she sort of does. Because in this frozen little world, you heat your home with livestock. There's no central heating. No radiators. No boiler in the basement that hums to life when you press a button. There's only fire, body heat, and the accidental blessings of biology. And nothing radiates heat like a large, farting mammal stuffed into a single-room home with 8 people and 0 shame. It's not just the cow. There's also a chicken or 2 flapping underfoot, a goat chewing the leg of a stool, and somewhere in the corner, a half-asleep pig making noises that sound alarmingly human. You'd think this would be chaos. You'd be right. But it's warm chaos. Medieval peasant houses were often constructed in what's called a longhouse design, a building that housed people at one end and animals at the other. And in the dead of winter, that little division? Basically symbolic. A low partition might separate the livestock, but their body heat seeped through the air, through the walls, even through the floor. You weren't just living with animals. You were living off them. Thermally speaking. Now, if you're feeling grossed out, take a moment to appreciate the cow. She gives milk, yes, but in winter, it's her 102 degrees Fahrenheit body temperature you care about. Stand next to her long enough and your frozen fingers start to tingle with feeling. Put your back against her side and you can almost pretend you're warm. Almost. Historians still argue whether people brought animals inside specifically for heat, or whether it was more about protecting the animals themselves. Either way, the result was the same. Your bedmate might chew cud in its sleep and occasionally sneeze on your blanket. But let's be clear, it wasn't cute. There's a romantic version of this story where animals and people huddle together like a nativity scene. But in reality? It's muddy hooves, powerful smells, and the unmistakable sound of your goat relieving itself right next to your bread oven. You sigh and scratch at your arm. The fleas are back. One of the cows had lice last month and now it's a house-wide issue. You make a mental note to dust everyone with ashes later. Or maybe dried marigold, if there's any left. One of those old herbal tricks that sometimes works and always makes you smell like a wilted salad. Still, there are perks. The animal's presence keeps the room humid enough to prevent your sinuses from turning into stalactite factories. And their fidgeting in the night, loud as it is, reminds you that you're not completely alone in the cold. At least someone's breathing regularly. Even if that someone occasionally licks the butter churn. You wrap your cloak tighter and sit near the hearth, watching your pig rearrange its bedding. She noses a pile of straw into a corner with such determination you start taking notes. She's warmer than you are. Smarter too, possibly. You remember last winter when your neighbor tried to build a separate barn for his animals, hoping to keep the house cleaner. It was ambitious. Noble, even. And by January, he'd moved back in with his oxen, saying the barn was haunted. Or maybe he just missed being able to thaw his boots against a sheep's belly. Some villages even had traditions about which animals brought the best heat. Pigs were popular, they're big, warm, and produce a lot of thermal output. Cows were prized, obviously, but they took up space. Chickens? Bonus heaters, especially if you could convince them to sit on your lap. Just watch your eyes. A quirky medieval tip you've heard, sleeping on a raised platform with straw underneath and a dog curled at your feet was considered prime winter comfort. The dog wasn't just a pet. It was a low-level heating device. People measured cold by how many dogs you needed. A 3-dog night wasn't just a phrase, it was survival math. You remember one night not long ago, when the fire had gone out and no one had the energy to get up. The pig crawled closer. The dog wedged herself into the straw beside you. And between the lot of you, the room didn't feel quite so deadly. You drifted off to sleep listening to snorts, snores, and the sound of your brother muttering in Latin for no reason at all. It wasn't paradise. But it was warm enough. You stand now, stretching, trying not to bump your head on the low rafters. The goat gives you a look that says, "Feed me or I chew your sock again." You toss her a wilted cabbage leaf and step gingerly around a puddle that may or may not have been there yesterday. Then you head for the door, ready to chop more wood, fetch more water, and avoid slipping on ice in front of the neighbor again. As you go, you look back one last time at your family's makeshift menagerie. Steam rises from the backs of the cows. The chickens are preening. The pig is farting proudly in her sleep. And you? You feel weirdly grateful. Because in the bleakest months, your life depends not just on fire, food, or faith, but on a small indoor zoo with no concept of personal space. You close the door gently behind you. Your boots crunch through the crusty snow as you step into the blinding grey of another winter day. The sky looks like wet parchment, low, sullen, and incapable of joy. You'd love to just crawl back inside and resume your blanket impersonation, but work doesn't stop just because your toes have gone on strike. That whole idea of winter being a time of rest for peasants. It's a nice theory. And it's true, to an extent. Fields lie fallow. No planting, no harvesting. But here's the catch, you still have to survive, and survival takes work. In fact, winter might be more work in some ways. Because everything you need, water, heat, food, fights you every step of the way. Your first job this morning? Firewood. Always firewood. The pile behind your house has shrunk dramatically. What was once a proud mountain of chopped logs is now a sad molehill with a dusting of frost and a chicken using it as a perch. You grab your axe, which has frosted over again despite being inside, and trudge to the tree line. Every step in the snow takes twice the effort. Your legs burn, and your breath fogs up instantly, curling around your hood like a cranky ghost. You find the old ash tree that's already half dead and start chopping. It's slow. The axe bounces off the icy bark. Your hands are so numb you keep checking to see if they're still attached. Every swing stirs a puff of powdered snow. Every crack of the wood is oddly satisfying, like breaking a frozen sin in half. You think about yesterday, when your cousin tried to split kindling without gloves and ended up bleeding from 6 different fingers. He claims the blood helped melt the ice faster. You're not sure whether to laugh or worry. Historians still debate whether peasants had designated winter tasks or simply adapted to whatever needed doing, but accounts agree on one thing: woodcutting was vital. Fire was everything. Heat, cooking, light, comfort, health. No fire? No chance. Once the logs are cut, you strap them with a leather cord and drag them back to the house. Slowly. Like a very unmotivated donkey. The sled screeches along the packed snow and hits every frozen rut like it's personally offended by your spine. But wait, your day isn't done. There's the fence. The one that blew down last week during the windstorm. You'd hope to ignore it. Maybe pretend it fixed itself. But then the neighbor's goat wandered over, ate part of your cabbage store, and looked at you like it was your fault. So you gather more stakes, frozen rope, and a hammer that might as well be made of ice. You work in silence, your breath puffing like steam from a tired kettle. Each nail you hammer through splinters the brittle wood. You curse quietly and pretend the Virgin Mary isn't listening. Later, someone from the village calls for help with a stuck cart. You go, because that's what people do, you help. And because you remember last winter when you were the one buried in snow up to your armpits, yelling for anyone within earshot. So you haul, you dig, you strain your shoulders trying to lift the frozen axle from the rut it's been cradled in since dawn. Your cloak gets caught on a branch. Your boot sinks into a hidden puddle. Your glove rips. And still, it's just barely noon. One quirky winter job people forget about? Ice collection. If you live near a lake or river, and you're the lucky one, you might be sent out with a pick to collect ice blocks for storage. Not for refrigeration, mind you, just to stock the cellar, where certain foods or drinks needed to stay cool even in winter. Why? Because nothing screams class like drinking half-frozen wine with your rabbit stew. But for most peasants, there's no ice house. There's just snow. Everywhere. And it turns every outdoor chore into a mini survival trial. You once slipped carrying a sack of grain, cracked your shin on the millstone, and lay in the snow muttering oaths while your cousin laughed so hard he dropped the eggs. The eggs froze. The bruise lasted 2 weeks. And even when you think the day's work is over, there's always something else. A leak in the roof. A bucket that cracked. A door hinge that froze shut and needs warming with coals. You go from job to job, never quite warming up, never quite drying off. Every movement is a negotiation between what needs doing and what won't make your fingers fall off. You pause now at the edge of the yard. The sun, if you can call that smudge in the sky a sun, is already drooping. You've got maybe 2 hours of light left, and still the goat pen needs mending. You smile bitterly at your own optimism this morning. Maybe today I'll get to rest, you'd thought. How quaint. How foolish. You've already passed 3 different kinds of exhaustion. You're working on a 4th. But you keep going. Because no one else is going to haul the hay. No one else is going to fix the latch. No one else is going to carry the water from the well when the bucket slips and dumps itself into the slush like it has a personal vendetta. And as you haul the last log into the house, shoulder aching, you pass your sister struggling to light a new fire with wet kindling. You take the flint from her gently, strike twice, and watch the flame catch. It's tiny. Flickering. Weak. But it's a start. You sit near the hearth that evening, boots steaming gently, knees throbbing from too much hauling and hammering. The house smells like smoke, old wool, and cabbage that gave up halfway through cooking. You give anything for a bath, or a soft bed, or a day without icy wind slicing through every seam in your tunic, but instead, you get a hacking cough from the guy next to you and a sudden realization, winter diseases came for everyone, and they didn't knock. Your cousin leans back and wheezes dramatically. Everyone pretends not to notice, but you all do. Because in a medieval winter, a single cough could mean a cold, or it could mean you'd better start planning the funeral. It starts slowly, someone sniffles. Someone else gets a sore throat. Then, 2 days later, half the household is sneezing, coughing, and making deathbed noises with the flair of amateur actors. You try to stay positive. Maybe it's just the winter fever. Maybe it'll pass. But then your little brother starts shivering violently under 3 layers of cloaks. Your uncle won't get out of bed. And the neighbor's been deliriously chanting about turnips since sunrise. Not great signs. The cold isn't just inconvenient, it's an open invitation for every infection to waltz in and take up residence. Pneumonia, bronchitis, pleurisy, words you don't necessarily know, but you definitely feel. And let's not forget the classics, tuberculosis, or consumption, as it was called. So popular it got its own aesthetic. Bonus points if you cough blood onto a handkerchief while gazing tragically out a frosted window. You try not to think about it. You poke the fire. You sip lukewarm broth. You pull your cloak tighter and tell yourself it's just the cold making your throat hurt. Definitely not a death cough. Probably. But you remember last winter. The blacksmith's daughter died in her sleep. One night she was fine, well, winter fine. The next morning, cold as the hearthstone. They said it was quinsy, an old term for a severe throat infection that swells until it cuts off breathing. It doesn't sound real until you've seen it. Then it sounds like a horror story written by a sadist with a medical fetish. One of the more bizarre fringe beliefs of the time? Some people thought that wrapping a warm dead mouse in cloth and placing it on the chest could draw out a lung infection. Don't laugh too hard, you've tried worse. You once let someone smear goose fat and mustard on your ribs while chanting a prayer to St. Blaise. It helped. Probably. Maybe. Historians still argue whether people understood contagion the way we do today. Most likely, they didn't. Disease was blamed on bad air, sin, cold humors, or even your mood. Were you melancholic? You probably brought the illness on yourself. Are you angry all the time? That's going to inflame your spleen. Better leech it. Speaking of which, medicine. That's adorable. If you're sick in the winter, you have a few options, and none of them are inspiring. Option 1, do nothing. Pray. Drink warm beer. Sleep by the fire and hope the fever breaks before you do. Option 2, the village healer. She's seen things. She smells like dried herbs and has more opinions than you can handle. She'll feed you onion syrup, wrap you in nettles, and say a charm over your forehead while muttering about root vegetables. It's half medicine, half witchcraft, and honestly, sometimes it works. Option 3, the monastery infirmary. If you're allowed in. Monks had the best access to herbs and semi-reliable books. But even they were mostly guessing. You'll be bled, purged, and prayed over. Again, 33% success rate, give or take. And if you're really unlucky, you'll catch the plague. No, not that plague. Not yet. But even before the Black Death made its grand entrance in the 14th century, there were regular waves of deadly outbreaks. Influenza-like viruses swept through villages. Childhood diseases like measles or scarlet fever didn't take a vacation just because it snowed. And with everyone crammed together, breathing each other's coughs and sleeping in piles like particularly depressed puppies, it spreads fast. You shift now, feeling your own chest tighten with every inhale. It's probably nothing. Probably. But to be safe, your mother hands you a clove of garlic to chew. Medicinal. Vampires. Cold prevention. Pick your folklore. Either way, your breath could knock out a bear now. You glance around the room. Your sister's blowing her nose into the same cloth she used to dry dishes. Your father is coughing quietly and pretending he isn't. The goat sneezes. You wonder if goats can catch human colds. You don't want to find out. A quirky little superstition says that putting a knife under your pillow will cut the fever from your dreams. So tonight, you do it. You don't believe it, but you're not taking chances. You also hang a sprig of dried sage from the rafters, just in case. There's a quiet moment now. Everyone's bundled in. The fire is low. Outside, snow falls in heavy flakes that seem to hush the world. And in that silence, someone sneezes so hard they wake the baby, the dog, and the chicken. You sigh. Winter diseases, 1, 0. You wake up with a toe that feels wrong. Not painful exactly. Just numb in a way that makes your brain whisper, you probably shouldn't look at it. But you do. And sure enough, it's a bit too purple, a bit too stiff, and not at all reassuring. So what happens next? You hobble over to Sister Gertrude, and brace yourself, because in a medieval winter, there are no doctors, just leeches. You're not even joking. You plop yourself down on a stool near the fire as she unwraps your foot. She frowns. Makes a sound that lands somewhere between pity and disappointment. And then she reaches for her pouch. You know the one. The leech pouch. Because what's the go-to medical intervention for almost anything in this era? Bloodletting. You got a fever? Let some blood out. You're sluggish? Let some blood out. Your dreams are spooky? You guessed it, bleed them. It all goes back to the theory of the 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Your job, according to medieval medicine, is to keep those humours balanced. And if something is wrong, like, say, your foot's gone rogue and turned the colour of sadness, it must be because one humour is overpowering the others. Most likely, blood. So, time to release it. Sister Gertrude says a quick prayer and then pulls a fat, glossy leech from her tin. It wiggles lazily. You look at it. It looks at you. You both regret this deeply. The leech is placed gently on your toe. At first, you feel nothing. Then, a gentle tug. Then the slow realization that something slimy is feeding off you like it's brunch and you're the buffet. You suppress a shudder. The leech is just doing its job. And to be fair, it's more reliable than some of the barber surgeons you've heard about. Historians still argue whether bloodletting actually did anything. Some studies suggest minor therapeutic value in reducing inflammation. Others suggest it was mostly a placebo, and a messy one at that. But in the medieval world, it was the standard. If you weren't bleeding, were you even trying to heal? You sit silently, watching the leech plump up like a wineskin. Your aunt, ever supportive, offers you a swig of something for the nerves. It burns all the way down. Not medicine, but close enough. Of course, leeches weren't your only option. There were other horrifyingly creative methods of dealing with winter ailments. One fringe favorite? Cauterization. Got a bad cough? A festering sore? Just heat an iron rod until it glows red and press it to the problem. Painful? Yes. Effective? Dubiously. But if nothing else, it made people think twice about complaining. Another classic? Poultices. You mash up herbs, bread, or even animal dung, yes, really, and smear it on the affected area. Then wrap it in cloth and hope for the best. Some healers swore by boiled cabbage leaves on the chest. Others liked onion paste under the arms. One old man swears his rheumatism was cured by rubbing his joints with goose fat and whispering Ave Maria backward. Need surgery? No, you don't. Not really. Not in winter. Because surgery means infection, and infection in winter means game over. Even minor wounds can turn septic fast. You remember when the miller's apprentice nicked his hand with a scythe? Within a week, his entire arm was black. They cut it off with a saw heated in the fire. He lived. Kind of. He's not cheerful anymore. And let's talk about dentistry. Have a bad tooth? No anesthetic. No gentle extraction. Just sit on a bench, grip the sides, and hope the blacksmith's tongs don't slip. Then walk home with your mouth full of blood, praying the cold will numb the pain before infection sets in. But hey, herbal remedies weren't all bad. Some healers had genuine skill. You've taken teas made of elderflower and mint that soothed your stomach. Chewed willow bark for headaches, that one does work. Actually, willow contains salicin, a cousin of aspirin. And garlic, though a breath killer, did seem to help with colds. Whether it cured you or just made everyone stand far enough away that you stopped catching their germs, you'll never know. Still, you can't shake the feeling that winter just multiplies every risk. Every scratch becomes a drama. Every cough becomes a threat. Every blister could be your last. The leech finally drops off with a satisfied plop. Sister Gertrude smiles sweetly and pats your foot with a cloth that used to be white. You try to smile back, but the whole experience has left you emotionally bruised. Drink this, she says, handing you a steaming mug of something that smells like boiled roots and desperation. You sip. It's thick. It's bitter. You pretend it's helping. She gives you a dried sprig of something and tells you to sleep with it under your pillow. You nod. You've reached that point in winter where if someone told you wrapping yourself in cabbage leaves would fix everything, you'd be halfway to the vegetable cellar already. You limp back to your corner of the house. The others eye your foot with curiosity. You offer no comment. You wrap it up, tuck it into your straw mattress, and pray it's still attached in the morning. The pig snorts. Your brother sneezes on you. The fire flickers low. And you whisper to yourself, just don't get sick again. Because in a world where medical advice includes leeches, fire, and praying not to die, prevention is your best friend. The air inside your home smells like smoke, wool, and fish. You sniff again, just to be sure. Yes, fish. But not the pleasant, fresh-caught kind. This is salted, smoked, and suspicious. You glance over at the table, more a plank balanced on barrels, and there it is, your winter feast, proudly starring a glistening slab of preserved herring and something that might once have been a pudding. It's a celebration, technically. Winter feasts were rare but sacred. They broke up the monotony of suffering with a slightly fancier kind of suffering. You're not eating more food, just different food. And tonight, it's all been laid out like a ritual of thankfulness and indigestion. The centerpiece of this noble spread is a dish called plum pottage. Before you get excited, there are no plums. Or if there are, they've been boiled down into sweet anonymity alongside onions, breadcrumbs, spices, and a vague memory of mutton. It looks like mud, smells like a candle, and tastes not bad, honestly. Sweet and meaty. Kind of like a meat jelly on holiday. Beside it sits the fish. Salt cod, specifically. One of the only meats allowed during fasting days. You chew cautiously, expecting bones and getting them. It's tough, it's dry, and it's exactly what your ancestors would have called a treat. And then there's the ale. Warmed by the fire, cloudy from the barrel, and spiced with whatever dried herbs were closest to hand, cinnamon if you're fancy, mustard seed if you're not. Someone's cracked an egg into theirs and stirred it with a hot iron poker. Posset, they call it. You call it egg soup with regrets. This is one of the 12 or so celebration meals allowed in winter. The calendar revolves around them: Christmas, Epiphany, St. Agnes's Eve, Candlemas. Religious feast days where even the poorest households tried to cook something different. Not necessarily better, just not pottage for once. Historians still argue whether these winter feasts actually alleviated hunger or simply served as psychological boosts. The consensus? A little of both. They didn't solve starvation, but they reminded people that the world hadn't entirely forgotten them. You're seated now with your family, shoulders pressed close, everyone leaning toward the warmth of the hearth and the smell of something marginally edible. Your mother cuts slices from a loaf of dark rye, tough as a helmet. You dip it into the pottage. It softens. Briefly. Your uncle makes a joke about last year's plum pudding still being in his guts. Your aunt glares. You all laugh anyway, because on feast nights, you try not to talk about how hard winter is. Just for a few hours, you pretend the outside world isn't full of snowdrifts, dead crops, and wolves. Speaking of wolves, your youngest brother casually mentions he saw one near the tree line yesterday. Everyone nods gravely, chewing in unison. No one's surprised. You're almost used to it now. Nothing quite says festive season like sharpening your knife while humming a hymn. One quirky tradition tonight, the bread figure. Your grandmother shaped a crude little man out of dough, baked until hard, and now she sets him at the table. For the spirits, she says. No one eats him. He watches over the meal like a carb-loaded guardian angel. You remember last year's feast vividly. There was a pig's head, boiled and decorated with rosemary. Your cousin sang a song to it. You're still not sure if that was tradition or improvisation. Either way, it was weirdly moving. But not every feast is jolly. Some winters are harsher. Food stores run low. Salted meats grow fuzzy. The dried peas turn to powder. On those nights, the feast is symbolic. A single apple shared between 6. A bit of honey on stale bread. You say the prayers louder, trying to fill the silence where food should be. Tonight, though, you've got the basics: bread, fish, broth, and a spiced pudding that might or might not contain meat. It's enough. One quirky footnote: in some places, people would hide small tokens inside feast dishes, a bean, a coin, a tiny carved charm. Whoever found it was crowned Lord of Misrule for the evening. They'd lead songs, play the fool, maybe even command others to do silly chores. It was a brief reversal of roles, a way to inject laughter into a life that didn't offer it freely. Your brother just choked on something. A bean? A splinter? No one sure. He declares himself the Lord anyway. You all indulge him, because it's nice to laugh, even if your teeth are chattering between bites. You sip your ale, now lukewarm and thick, and lean back. The room is glowing, crowded, and slightly rank. Someone's goat has gotten too close to the bread. Again. But it's a feast. And that means something. The candles flicker. The wind howls through the wall seams. And for a moment, you feel almost full. Not warm. Not comfortable. But full. And in the middle of a brutal winter, that's as close to joy as you're going to get. The feast is over. Your stomach is doing that medieval thing where it's both full and vaguely alarmed. You stretch out by the hearth, eyes half closed, letting the last candle sputter while someone hums an off-key carol. It's peaceful, almost too peaceful. Because the moment you start to feel safe, there's a scratching at the door. A low growl. A long pause. And just like that, you remember, winter isn't just cold, it's dangerous. And the wolf is literally at the door. Your mother freezes. The room goes quiet. Even the goat stops chewing. You all stare at the wooden door like it might explode inward at any second. It probably won't. But probably isn't good enough. You slowly reach for the nearest stick of firewood, ready to use it as a club. Your father silently nudges the heavy barrel you use as a nightlock against the door frame. It makes a hollow thunk that feels reassuring and useless at the same time. Wolves in the medieval winter weren't fairy tale villains. They were a very real, very organized threat. When the snow deepened and prey became scarce, wolves turned desperate. And desperate wolves are creative. They'd stalk villages. Circle farms. Wait in the tree line just outside torchlight. Sometimes they traveled in pairs. Sometimes in packs. Sometimes one bold one would lure a dog or goat outside, while the others waited. You learned that lesson last winter when your best hen vanished without a sound and the tracks outside looked far too organized. You press your ear to the door. The scratching stops. You hear panting, hot breath fogging against the wood. You hold your breath. The creature moves away. Probably. Possibly. You stay still for another 10 minutes just in case. Historians still argue whether wolf attacks on humans were common or whether chroniclers exaggerated the danger. The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. Attacks weren't everyday events, but in times of famine, war, or plague, when bodies were abundant and food wasn't, wolves crept closer to the firelight. In 1420s France, for example, a notorious pack terrorized Paris itself. The people named them Corto's wolves and eventually hunted them down in a public campaign. Imagine being so wolf-weary that you throw your last torch into a wolf hunt instead of saving it for warmth. And it wasn't just wolves. Bandits, too, knew that winter was when villagers let their guard down. Doors locked, gates loose, fields abandoned. If you had food, livestock, or anything vaguely flammable, you were a target. There are stories of entire hamlets raided in the dead of night by starving ex-soldiers who'd rather risk violence than starvation. That's why your house has a night bar, a heavy timber you wedge across the door. It won't stop a determined group, but it'll slow them down enough for you to wake everyone and prepare a loud, panic defense involving fire pokers and sharp sticks. Tonight, it's probably just the wind. Maybe a curious fox. But your nerves are fried now, and you find yourself staring at the shadowy edges of the room like a sentry. The fire's burned low again. You pile on another log and try to ignore the sound of something crunching in the snow outside. Your uncle stands, grabs his boots, and steps outside with a torch. You all wait. Long seconds. A shout. A thump. Then laughter. He comes back holding a stray sheep from the neighbor's flock. No wolves, he says. Just Matilda trying to freeze to death in our bushes again. Relief floods the room like hot soup. You laugh, but it's brittle. Still, you're not completely reassured. Because your dreams tonight will be full of glowing eyes in the dark, padded footsteps in the snow, and teeth, so many teeth. A quirky old custom in your village? Hanging a wolf skull above the door for protection. It's said to ward off future attacks, though no one's quite sure if it works because wolves fear it, or just because you've already proven you can kill one. You saw one once, nailed above the blacksmith's shop. Its grin was permanently frozen in a kind of horrified approval. There are also charms. Salt scattered on the doorstep. Iron nails driven into the threshold. A line of ash across the floor. Keeps them out, your grandmother says. Wolves, spirits, even creditors. You did all three last week. Still got sniffed at by a fox. The truth is, in winter, everything is closer. The forest, once a distant edge of your world, now seems to press up against your walls. The dark has weight. The silence has corners. And you realize how porous life is when the line between home and wild is a plank of rotting wood and a barrel. You sit back down, finally. The room breathes again. Someone breaks out the last bit of honey. It tastes warm, sweet, defiant. You huddle under your cloak, the fire crackling low, and tell yourself the wolves won't come tonight. Then the dog growls again. And you don't sleep. You haven't seen the sun in days. Not really. Oh sure, it rises, technically, but it just kind of lurks behind a veil of grey clouds, casting a dim, washed-out glow that feels more like mood lighting for a funeral than actual daylight. You squint toward the sky and wonder, half joking, if God misplaced the brightness setting. Because let's face it, without the sun, you're starting to come a little unhinged. You're not alone. Your mother's been staring at the same knot in the wall for 20 minutes. Your uncle hasn't spoken all day, unless muttering to a pot of beans counts. Even the goat seems moody. She bit the broom this morning and then sulked in the corner like she'd been wronged by the universe. Winter in the medieval world wasn't just physically brutal. It was mentally exhausting. Without sun, without warmth, without even the illusion of variety, time stretches out like a punishment. You wake up in darkness, you do your chores in darkness, and you fall asleep wondering if that weird feeling in your chest is just boredom, or something darker. Today, you've been hit by the full weight of it, the medieval version of seasonal affective disorder, though back then, it didn't have a name. Or a lamp. Or a vitamin D supplement. It just showed up like an unwanted guest and moved into your skull. Historians still argue whether medieval people suffered from the same patterns of seasonal depression as we do today. After all, they were used to it, right? Maybe. But just because something is expected doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. And you, my friend, are deep in the thick of it. This morning, you tried to get up and fetch firewood, and couldn't. Not right away. You sat on your straw bed, cloak around your shoulders, just thinking. About the frost on the inside of the window. About the dull ache in your shoulders. About the fact that your last dream involved arguing with a wheelbarrow. It's not that you're lazy. You want to move. But everything feels heavier. Slower. Like you're walking through molasses made of grey snow and sadness. You drag yourself outside eventually, blinking against the wind. It doesn't help. The landscape looks like it's been smudged with charcoal. Black trees. White snow. Grey sky. Repeat until insanity. One quirky belief from this time? That too much winter darkness could make your thoughts cold. Some people even thought it could freeze your soul. There were stories of melancholia so intense, it turned people inward until they stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped everything. They called it Suicidio or the noonday demon, a kind of spiritual fog that settled over the heart. You call it Monday. Back inside, you try to cheer yourself up with something, anything. Maybe carve something small from wood. Maybe sing. But the knife feels heavy in your hand, and the song dies in your throat. You end up just sitting by the hearth, watching the fire flicker and imagining it burning a hole through the endless cold. Your sister tries to make conversation. She asks if you remember summer. Summer. It feels like a myth. Like some bard's ridiculous tale of warm days and ripe fruit. You nod vaguely, pretending you do. But all you can remember is not being this tired. One of your neighbors has started talking to his sheep. Not like, hey, sheep, move over. But conversations. Serious ones. Yesterday he asked one of them for marital advice. The sheep, for the record, disapproved. The worst part? The silence. Not peaceful, restful silence. The kind of silence that presses. That hums just under your ears. That makes you suddenly aware of every creak in the rafters, every drip from the eaves, every distant wolf howl as if it's whispering your name. You poke the fire again. There's a solution, of course: light. Heat. Song. But you're low on candles. Firewood is running thin. And no one really feels like singing. You tried humming earlier and your cousin told you to stop because it sounded haunted. So you do the next best thing, routine. You sweep the floor. You fold the blankets. You inventory the turnips. It's not fun, but it anchors you. It gives your hand something to do while your brain tries not to spiral into the idea that this might be your last winter. Or maybe your longest one. You remember the priest's advice: the devil loves an idle mind. You try to stay busy. But the devil, if he's real, is already here, and he looks like boredom, and feels like cold bones. Later that evening, your aunt brings out a surprise, a dried orange peel, saved from a summer trade. She tosses it on the fire. The room fills with a scent so bright, so not winter, that it actually makes your chest ache. You close your eyes and inhale like it's a drug. For a moment, you're somewhere else. Just a moment. Outside, the snow has begun again. Thick flakes. Quiet. Suffocating. You sit down beside the dog, who sighs dramatically and leans against your leg. You feel her warmth. You scratch behind her ears. She closes her eyes. The darkness presses in again. But this time, you press back. Just a little. You wake to the sound of dripping, slow, steady, ominous. Not the hopeful kind of drip that means spring is creeping in, but the mocking kind, like nature's version of a leaky ceiling taunt. You peek out from under your cloak, groggy and suspicious. Something feels off. The air tastes strange. The goat is twitchy. That only means one thing. Someone wants to know the weather. But of course, there's no forecast. No sunny voice on the radio chirping about a 60% chance of flurries. No app, no radar, no map. So how do you know whether a storm is coming? You go check on the onions. Yep. You heard me. The onions. Because in a medieval winter, weather prediction means folklore, guesswork, and a surprising number of vegetables. You head over to the shelf where your aunt has arranged the weather onions, a row of half-dried bulbs sitting in a line like they're waiting for judgment. She picks one up and squints at the layers. If the skins are tight and crinkly, it might mean frost. If they're loose and damp, rain. Unless it's fog. Or wind. She mutters, pokes one with a finger, then nods grimly. Big snow. Maybe thunder. You nod solemnly, not because you agree, but because onion-based meteorology is not to be questioned. This isn't the only method. You've seen people hang frogs upside down in jars to see if they twitch before a storm. You've seen pine cones placed near the hearth. If they close up, bad weather is coming. Some folks tie horsehairs to the window and watch for curliness. And your neighbor, who's only wrong half the time, swears by the behavior of her chickens. Last time they all refused to leave the coop, she said, storm in 2 days. 2 days later, you were hip-deep in slush with frozen socks and a newfound hatred for poultry-related prophecy. Historians still debate how accurate these methods were. Some, like reading animal behavior, probably had kernels of truth. Animals respond to barometric pressure shifts better than we do. Others, like slicing an onion in 12 parts on New Year's and salting each to represent a month's moisture, were more ritual than science. Still, they gave people a sense of control in a world dominated by unpredictability. And you need control in winter. Knowing, or thinking you know, what's coming lets you prepare. If it's going to snow, you bring in more wood, reinforce the barn door, double layer your socks, such as they are. If a thaw is coming, you shift your attention to runoff paths and roof leaks. It's like trying to outmaneuver a clever enemy who won't tell you the rules. Today, your neighbors come over with a chunk of beeswax. He presses it into your aunt's hand and whispers, "Ice storm's coming." The moon had a ring last night. A ring around the moon is bad news, always has been. Some say it's snow. Some say illness. Either way, you're filling every pot in the house with water just in case the well freezes again. One quirky tradition? If it's Epiphany and the weather's warm, that's supposed to mean a long, cruel winter. If it's cold on Epiphany, that's good luck. You laugh every year when your uncle tries to interpret the signs. Last year, he said a warm January meant a short winter. You got snow until May. And don't forget dreams. Dreams, especially during holy nights, were considered omens. You dreamed last night of a burning tree. Your mother says that means high winds. Your brother insists it means gas. You hope it means nothing. Sometimes, monks were the best weather watchers. Up in their cold stone towers, scribbling down everything. Ice on the 3rd day. Goat walk backward again. Storms followed the red moon. You wonder if they really knew more, or if they were just better at documenting every sneeze the sky made. Your house doesn't have much insulation, so when weather hits, it hits hard. Snow comes sideways through the cracks. The roof drips on your forehead at night. Thunder shakes the rafters like an angry god. So even though the weather watching methods are laughable, you pay attention. Because once the storm begins, there's no going back. You step outside now, bundled and wary. The clouds are low and fast moving. The air smells electric, like iron and wet leaves. You check the chicken coop. Empty. You check the goat. She's hiding behind a barrel. Even the pig is quiet, which is unnatural and probably foreboding. You light a few extra rushlights and tuck the dry goods higher up on the shelf. Your mother pins sprigs of rosemary and rowan above the door. Protection, she says. From lightning. Or snow spirits. Or maybe just bad luck. And you sit near the fire that night, listening for the change. You know it's coming. The room is heavy with it. The flame flickers sideways. Someone's tooth aches. Someone else feels a draft no one else does. You pull your cloak tighter and listen. The storm always announces itself, somehow. A crack in the beams. A pressure in your ears. A single drop of water falling from the ceiling into your mug. Plunk. There it is. You glance at the onion on the shelf. It was right. Again. The snow crunches under your feet as you cross the manor courtyard, teeth chattering, cloak snapping in the wind like an angry flag. You don't often get invited up to the big house, but today is special. The steward barked orders at dawn, feast at sunset. Don't be late. Wear something without holes. You looked at your tunic and thought, one hole is traditional, right? Because tonight, of all nights, you're going to a noble's winter feast. One with a singing boar's head. You walk into the great hall of the manor and are instantly hit by heat. Real heat. Not smoky coals on a dirt floor, but roaring fireplaces big enough to roast a sheep whole. You blink, dazzled by the flickering torchlight, and step onto an actual floor made of wood, not frozen mud. It creaks under your boots like it's laughing gently at your discomfort. The hall is enormous. Banners hang from the rafters, their edges fluttering. A long table stretches down the center, already cluttered with trenchers, cups, and servants moving like anxious bees. The air smells like rosemary, meat, and something rich enough to make your stomach growl just from the scent: roasted fat. Real roasted fat. Not the thin, boiled kind you're used to. You find your spot near the lower end of the table, far from the noble guests but close enough to see the action. You're technically help. Most peasants at these feasts aren't there to feast, they're there to serve, gawk, and maybe lick a trencher when no one's looking. Then you hear it, a trumpet call. Off-key, heroic, unmistakably theatrical. Everyone turns. Two servants emerge, arms trembling slightly. Between them, on a massive wooden platter, is the boar's head. Its mouth is stuffed with apples. Its eyes have been replaced with cloves or polished stones. Its tusks gleam, polished and sharp. Someone's wrapped a garland of herbs around its snout. It looks less like a meal and more like a guest of honor, one that may or may not be plotting revenge. Then, as tradition demands, a boy steps forward and begins to sing to it. The boar's head in hand bare eye. Bedecked with bays and rosemary. The whole room joins in, voices echoing off the stone walls. Some sing with enthusiasm. Some mumble awkwardly. One drunk noble tries to harmonize and sounds like a sheep drowning in mead. You just try not to stare at the boar's glassy eyes. This tradition, bizarre as it is, has deep roots. Boar's head feasts were real things in medieval England, often tied to Yuletide celebrations or major holy days. The boar, symbol of strength and wildness, was hunted, killed, and paraded into the hall like a captured enemy. In noble houses, it was as much performance as cuisine. And tonight? The performance is in full swing. After the singing ends, the head is placed reverently on the high table, where it mostly sits while everyone eats other bits of the boar. The head is just for show. Symbolic. It says, look what we conquered. Look what we tamed. You're handed a trencher, an old round of stale bread, used as both plate and edible sponge. Upon it is ladled something glorious, gravy, thick and steaming, with chunks of salted meat and what might be onions. Your hands tremble a bit. You try not to inhale it whole. There's also marchpane, a fancy sweet made of almonds and sugar. You won't get any. That's for the lords. But you stare at it, admiring the golden crust, the artistic flowers pressed into the top. It looks like something from a dream. You wonder if it's edible or just decorative. Then you see a noble woman pop a slice in her mouth like it's nothing. You feel faint. Beside you, someone whispers, "Last year, they had a dancing bear." You nod. You've heard stories. Some noble families like to entertain during winter feasts. Jugglers, musicians, even trained animals. Anything to make the long, dark season feel slightly less oppressive. Tonight there's music, a lute, a rebec, a flute so shrill it might summon frost demons. There are riddles shouted across the hall, and one knight stands up and recites a poem about a goose that turned into a bishop. You don't get it, but everyone laughs. A fringe tradition you're seeing for the first time, wassailing the livestock. After the feast, some of the more superstitious guests will stumble into the barn, lift their cups, and literally toast the animals. Good health to the cow. Long milk to the sheep. It's part blessing, part drunken ritual, part insurance policy against spring famine. You just want more gravy. The evening rolls on. The nobles grow louder. The music gets faster. Someone drops a trencher and tries to eat it off the floor. You're not sure if that's part of the entertainment or not. And all the while, the boar's head watches. By the time the feast winds down, you are full in a way you haven't been in months. Not just food, sensation. You've seen candlelight reflecting off gold plates. You've tasted wine. You've listened to people debate whether fish have souls while stuffing themselves with eel pie. It's overwhelming. It's surreal. And you know that tomorrow, you'll be back to gruel and grey skies. But for tonight, you carry the taste of salted meat and wild herbs in your mouth. You carry the memory of a song sung to a dead pig's face. You carry warmth in your belly. And you quietly thank the boar, who gave its head, its body, and its eerie stare to remind everyone that winter could be conquered. At least for one night. You wake up late. The boar's head feast still lingers in your dreams, candles glowing, gravy dripping, a noble woman laughing like she'd never felt cold in her life. But now you're back in your world, your bed smells like goat, your hair is crunchy with hearth smoke, and the air is cold enough that your breath curls like a ghost trying to flee your mouth. And what's for breakfast? Salted meat and moldy bread. Not poetic. Not symbolic. Just what's left. You sit up, knees cracking like old wood, and shuffle to the corner where the food stores are kept. A few ceramic jars. A pile of shriveled root vegetables. And the barrels, those ominous wooden beasts that rattle when you lift the lid. Today's lucky pick? A chunk of salted pork that smells like sea air, regret, and something vaguely medicinal. You slice off a piece, if slice is the right word for sawing through cured sinew with a knife that's seen better decades. It peels away reluctantly, strands of grey fat hanging like tired cobwebs. You sniff it. Not too rancid. That's a win. Next, the bread. It was baked, you're going to guess 2 weeks ago. Maybe 3. It's dark, heavy, and hard enough to qualify as weaponry. You tap it on the table. It thunks like a warning. A bit of green fuzz clings to one corner. You scrape it off. You don't mention it to your sister. One of the great truths of medieval winter life is this: everything smells faintly of feet and decay. You're used to it now. Food isn't fresh, it's preserved, cured, pickled, dried, or just ignored long enough that you stop caring. You sit by the hearth and try to soften the bread in hot broth. No broth? Try water. No water? Suck on it until it no longer feels like chewing leather dipped in dust. And yet, this is good. This is food. This is survival. Historians agree, winter diets in the Middle Ages were a test of endurance, not taste. During the warmer months, food could be gathered, slaughtered, and stored. But come winter, it was all about what didn't rot, or at least didn't rot fast enough to kill you. Salted meats. Dried legumes. Root vegetables. Flat ale. Sometimes cheese, if you were lucky, and if the mice hadn't gotten there first. You chew the pork slowly, pretending it's still juicy. It's not. Your teeth ache from the salt. You drink warm water, trying to flush the sandpaper feeling from your tongue. Your cousin once joked that the meat was so salty it cured his sins. No one laughed. We all knew he ate most of it that night. A quirky little culinary trick. Soaking stale bread in beer. It softens the loaf and takes the edge off the mold. People even flavored it with garlic or herbs, if available. You once had some with a splash of vinegar and swore it was the best meal of the season. You were also very, very hungry. Today, your aunt brings out a surprise: dried apples. She sliced and hung them last summer. They're shriveled, chewy, a bit sour, but they taste like sunlight. You suck on one slowly and let it dissolve on your tongue like a memory. But then she adds them to the stew, and the moment's over. The stew is a greyish mix of barley, onion skins, and pork scraps. It's been reheated 3 times. It's thick enough to build walls with. You eat it anyway. You mop it up with the softened bread, chew until your jaw gives up, and swallow a chunk of gristle without chewing because you just can't anymore. There's a strange comfort in the routine. Everyone eating together. No one talking much. Just the scrape of spoons and the occasional sniff. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, there's warmth, food, and that one rat that won't stop rustling in the storage corner. You don't waste food, not a crumb. You eat the hard crusts. You lick the bowl. The dog licks the spoon when you're done. Waste is sin. Waste is death. There's always a cousin who didn't make it through the last winter, and you remember them every time you consider turning your nose up at stew. And sometimes, in a desperate moment, you get creative. You once tried roasting old bread over the fire until it turned into a kind of bitter toast. It crumbled into ash. Your brother added lard. It caught fire. You ate it anyway. There are stories of people grinding up bones into powder to make bone bread when the grain ran out. People boiling tree bark into soup. People chewing on leather belts soaked in water just to trick their stomachs into feeling full. Not stories from far away. Stories from your village. Even the lords up at the manor, you suspect, aren't eating so richly now that the feasting is over. Their cellars are probably lined with salted venison and wheels of aging cheese, but even luxury gets old when it's on repeat. You heard once that the Baron's son cried because his quail pie was cold again. You considered crying for different reasons. Still, winter food isn't just bleak, it's clever. The use of spices, when they can be found, is remarkable. Not for flavor, but for preservation. Pepper, mustard, vinegar, these things help keep meat edible longer. In your house, mustard is made by grinding seeds with stale ale. It burns your throat but makes the pork taste like something other than despair. Tonight, your family eats in relative silence. Your sister hums quietly. Your mother adds another log to the fire. Your father breaks the hard heel of bread with a grunt and offers it to you first. You chew it slowly. And as the wind howls outside, as the snow presses against the house like a cold blanket, you think, this is horrible. But also, this is enough. Tonight, you sleep a little easier. The wind has died down. The house creaks less. Even the pig hasn't kicked anything in her sleep for hours. But still, you sleep with one eye open, because deep down you know, fire is your friend, until it isn't. In winter, it's not wolves, or disease, or salted meat-induced despair that's most likely to destroy your home. It's the hearth. The literal center of your house. The only thing standing between you and a slow freeze, but also a smoldering beast waiting to jump its stone ring and take everything with it. You've seen it happen. The bakers lost their roof last winter. It was early morning, and the thatch caught an ember from the cooking fire. The whole thing lit up like dried kindling. By the time anyone got there, the chickens were cooked and the flour was dust. They rebuilt, but the walls still smell faintly of ash. And no one's quite sure if their rooster ever mentally recovered. You roll over and glance at your own fire. It's down to a few glowing coals now, flickering softly like tired stars. You wonder, for the 50th time, whether someone remembered to bank it properly, burying it in ash so it won't die overnight, but also won't jump to the basket of rushes next to it and murder you in your sleep. This is the nightly gamble: keep the fire burning, or risk freezing. But let it burn too freely, and you might wake up without a roof. Or eyebrows. Historians agree, house fires were terrifyingly common in the medieval period, especially in winter. The combination of dry thatch, wooden beams, open flame, and perpetual cold made every home a tinderbox. Chimneys were rare. Ventilation holes? Primitive. Sometimes fire smoke didn't even leave, it just curled in the rafters, waiting. Your house, like most, has no chimney. Just a smoke hole in the roof that sometimes works and often doesn't. When it snows hard, the hole clogs. When it rains, water drips in and hisses on the coals. When it's clear, sparks rise and dance upward, toward the flammable ceiling. That's why your mother makes you hang damp cloth near the walls, an early fire break. That's why you keep water buckets near the door. And that's why every time someone leans too close to the hearth, someone else shouts, "Mind the sparks." You remember that one winter your uncle tried to dry his socks by laying them on a stick directly above the fire. He forgot. They didn't just burn, they exploded. The smell lingered for a week. No one ever trusted him with drying chores again. And then there's the candles. Your cousin once left a tallow candle burning too close to the curtain. It caught, of course. Only a corner, thank God, but it turned the whole house into a panic zone. Now, candles are extinguished religiously. Every time someone stands up, someone else mutters, "Put that out." Still, you need the fire. Not just for warmth, but for cooking, for light, for drying your cloak, for the ritual of being alive in a house that otherwise feels like an ice cave. And so, you live with it. Carefully. There are superstitions about fire, too. Some people believe that letting the hearth die completely invites evil spirits. Others say a flame that flickers blue means someone in the house is close to death. You've watched that flame closely on bad nights. It flickered green once. No one spoke for an hour. One fringe tradition you remember well, fire whispering. When someone was sick or lost, a family member would whisper their name into the flames, hoping the fire would carry the prayer upward. You tried it once when the neighbor's son went missing in a snowstorm. He came back 3 days later, frostbitten, shaken, but alive. You still whisper sometimes. Just in case. Tonight, you wrap a wool scarf around your shoulders and move closer to the coals. You poke at them gently with the fire iron, nudging them into a little glowing pile. Then you cover them with ash, carefully, evenly. It's an art. Too little, the coals go out. Too much, they flare up. You sit for a moment longer, holding your hands close. The warmth doesn't really sink in anymore. Your bones still ache. But there's something psychologically soothing about fire. It makes you feel less alone. More in control. The dog is curled nearby, nose under her paw. The baby is snoring. The wind has returned, but softer now, more like a sigh than a scream. You stand. Stretch. Check the candle one more time. It's out. Good. Then you walk slowly to the bedding, careful not to brush your cloak too close to the flames. You've heard too many stories. A woman tripping and falling into the hearth. A man burning his beard clean off during a blessing. A child losing 3 fingers after poking a glowing log. Accidents. Quick, final, and brutal. You lie down, pull the wool blanket over your shoulder, and stare at the rafters. The fire glows in the corner of your vision. You pray it stays where it is. It's barely dawn when you're shaken awake by the sound of splashing. Not rain, though you wish it were, but someone knocking over the slop bucket again. Your little brother's fault, probably. Or the goat. Hard to tell before your eyes adjust. You sit up, groaning, the straw poking your back, and rub your neck. Today's not a rest day. Not even close. Because in this world, kids don't get to be kids, not in winter. Not really. You glance around the room. Your younger sister is already up, stoking the fire with a serious expression that doesn't belong on a 9-year-old. She looks like she's solving a crime. Your cousin's outside chopping kindling, his too big cloak dragging in the snow like a defeated wizard. The toddler is trying to wrestle the chamber pot. You decide not to intervene. Everyone needs their own battles. In the medieval winter, the idea of childhood as a protected phase of life doesn't exist. You're small, sure, and maybe you don't understand Latin, but you're expected to pull your weight the moment you can walk without falling into the fire. Historians agree that by the age of 7, most children in rural communities were already doing basic labor, carrying water, feeding animals, tending younger siblings, hauling firewood. And if you think that sounds grim, just wait until the ox cart gets stuck and you are the designated tow rope. You pull on your cloak, still stiff from yesterday's frost, and make your way outside. The sun is nothing more than a pale smudge above the trees. The cold cuts into your skin like you owe it money. Your job today? Cleaning the coop and checking the traps. Maybe hauling water. Maybe helping mend the barn door. Maybe a dozen other things no one wants to do, but everyone has to. You see the neighbor's children doing the same. One girl is hunched over a pail, her tiny hands red and raw as she scrubs the same cloth again and again. Her brother's got a basket of frozen turnips strapped to his back like a punishment. They wave, sort of. You nod, sort of. One of the quirkier things you remember from the last Holy Day feast, a traveling storyteller said that in the far-off future, children would go to places called schools during winter. Indoors. With books. For learning, not labor. Everyone laughed. And not the warm kind of laugh. The shore and maybe pigs will build houses kind. You gather some firewood, careful not to drop it. Your hands are too small for the axe, but no one really cares. You're expected to figure it out. Or freeze trying. Inside again, your sister is stirring the pottage. She's humming, softly. You recognize the tune, a lullaby your mother used to sing, back when she had the time and energy to do things like sing. You find yourself humming too, and she glances up, surprised. Then smiles. Just for a second. And then your brother walks in with a bloody nose and half a frozen rabbit, yelling about snares and snow, and I didn't cry, it just leaked. He did cry. Everyone knows. But no one says a word. Even leisure looks like labor. Games are made with what's around, bones, sticks, bundles of thread. You remember last winter when your cousin made a puppet from a dried apple. It had a face, sort of, until the goat ate it. He cried harder about the puppet than he did when his tooth fell out. Sometimes there's play. Brief, silly bursts. Sliding on ice, or hurling snowballs, or racing to the fence and back before your shoes fall apart. But it always ends the same way, someone falls. Someone cries. Someone gets yelled at for wasting daylight. Children in winter become miniature adults. Miniature cold adults. You were taught how to tend the fire at 6. How to gut a fish at 7. How to tell if a chicken's foot meant frost or thaw at 8. You'll probably be married by 15, dead by 40, and remembered for how well you kept the goats from freezing. Still, there are moments. Moments when the snow sparkles just right. When the smoke from the hearth curls upward like a spell. When your sister makes a face and you both break into laughter for no reason. When your father lifts you, just once, onto his shoulders and you feel, for a flicker of time, tall. You cling to those. Because winter doesn't care how old you are. It will bite your fingers, freeze your nose, sap your joy with the same indifference it offers everyone else. But you? You learn to bite back. The night settles in again, heavy as a wet wool cloak. You wrap yourself in your own damp layers, tilt your ear toward the wall, and brace yourself, because it's coming. You hear it before you feel it. First, a low clang. Then a drawn-out moo. Then the unmistakable sound of your neighbor yelling at his ox. Here it comes. Because in the medieval winter, nothing was ever quiet. Ever. The silence of snow? A lie? An illusion sold by poets and city folk who've never spent a full winter in a one-room hut with a cow, a coughing aunt, and a rooster with anxiety. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, and wonder for the 100th time if peace and quiet are just bedtime stories for adults. It starts small. The church bell tolls the canonical hours, matins, lauds, prime, and so on. Even in the dark. Even in the cold dark. Some poor soul gets up, rings the bell, and wakes half the village. It's meant to be spiritual. All you hear is bong, bong, and the gentle weeping of your patients. Then there's the livestock. All of them inside with you, of course. You've grown used to the goat's sighs, the pig's sleep snorts, and the cow's nighttime flatulence. But used to doesn't mean immune. There's always that one noise that jolts you awake like a bucket of ice water. Last night it was the chicken coughing. Chickens can't cough, you thought. Turns out, they can. And when they do, it's unsettling. Rats are a constant. You hear them skittering above, in the thatch. One falls through once a week. No one screams anymore. You just trap it, flick it outside, and go back to pretending you're not sharing your living space with 30 small roommates. Your brother grinds his teeth in his sleep. Your uncle snores like he's hiding a trumpet under his tongue. And then there's the fire, popping, hissing, occasionally spitting embers with the flair of a diva. You sleep with your foot pointed away from the hearth because you're not interested in becoming crispy as a bedtime aesthetic. And the wind, oh, the wind. It howls through the cracks like it's auditioning for a ghost opera. Some nights it moans low and long, like a dying giant crawling through the forest. Other nights it shrieks in bursts, slamming against the shutters, rattling the loose planks, testing the door like a burglar who really wants in. You swear you saw the hinges move once. You didn't sleep that night. Historians sometimes describe medieval nights as quiet and contemplative. To that, you say, come spend a week in my house. Quiet? Only if everyone dies at once. And let's not forget your neighbors. Sound travels. The smithy's apprentice laughs like a donkey with a head cold. The weaver's baby has opinions about everything. The priest's dog barks at shadows and phantoms, and occasionally his own tail. And all of them seem to coordinate their volume for maximum chaos right when you're trying to fall asleep. A quirky belief in your village says that strange nighttime sounds mean the spirits are restless. So when you hear a knocking that doesn't match the wind, or a thump from the roof with no snow falling, someone always mutters a prayer. Or throws salt. Or blames the cat. Your grandmother swears she once heard a ghost pacing the hallway. It turned out to be your cousin looking for the chamber pot in the dark. But no one corrected her. She seemed comforted by the idea of ghosts having strong calves. The ironic part? You miss the noise when it's too quiet. That eerie, dead silent quiet when even the wind forgets to blow. When the fire burns low, and the goat stops moving, and your aunt stops coughing, that's when you sit up and listen. Because that kind of silence doesn't mean peace. It means something's wrong. You remember the night before the fever took your neighbor. The house was so quiet you could hear water drip from the rafters. No snoring. No coughing. Just the soft, awful stillness of waiting. Silence in winter isn't restful. It's suspense. Tonight, though, everything is back to normal. You've got the full concert. The baby's crying. The pig is dreaming and squealing in its sleep. Your sister just kicked you, muttered something about a carrot, and rolled over. The fire pops like it's telling jokes you don't understand. The wind sings a 3-note melody and rattles the shutter with perfect timing. And you? You smile, weirdly comforted. This is winter's lullaby, chaotic, messy, full of creatures and clamor and clunky humanity trying its best not to freeze. It's not peaceful. But it is life. You pull the blanket over your head, wrap your cloak tighter, and drift off, lulled by the sound of a world refusing to fall quiet. You're up before the sun again, which isn't saying much. Sunrise is basically a suggestion at this point. You stretch your aching limbs, step over a sleeping pig, and open the door just wide enough to let in a sharp blast of icy air and one nosy chicken. Today's different. Because today, you might go to jail over a turnip. You throw your cloak over your shoulders and trudge through the snow, past crooked fences and houses that lean like they're tired of pretending to stand. Your neighbor catches your eye. He gives you a look, not hostile, just tired. You nod. It's the universal winter gesture for let's not talk about it. You're headed toward the village green, which is currently more ice than green, where the constable is gathering a small crowd. Someone's been accused of stealing food. Again. And in this season, that's not just petty theft, it's survival treason. The accused is young, barely more than a boy. His face is wind-chapped, his boots mismatched, and his tunic has so many patches it might qualify as a quilt. He stands silently while a stout old woman points an accusing finger. He took 3 of my turnips. 3, she shrieks. I found the greens in the snow behind my fence. Someone murmurs in agreement. Someone else snorts. A dog barks because it can. You just watch. Because this scene? It's normal. Medieval winter justice wasn't all formal courts and powdered wigs. It was loud, personal, and often unfair. Sure, there were laws, codified ones, even, but in small villages like yours, justice looks a lot like who yells loudest. The reeve or local bailiff might step in, but most of the time, disputes are settled in the court of public opinion. And today, the public is hungry and grumpy. The constable frowns and squints at the boy. Well, he grunts. The boy shrugs. They were in the snow, sir. That doesn't make them free, the old woman snaps. Wasn't stealing, the boy mutters. Was gathering. Someone behind you chuckles. You don't. You know this could be you. Could be anyone. You remember your own father once gathered a carrot from the edge of the Lord's hunting path. He got caught. Spent 2 nights in the stocks with frozen feet and a bruised ego. Your family didn't speak of it again, but your uncle has never looked at a carrot the same way since. Historians still debate how harsh rural justice really was in these scenarios. Punishments varied wildly, some were symbolic, like being made to sweep the village square, or wear a shame hood. Others were brutal, stocks, fines you couldn't pay, or being banished in the middle of winter, which was as good as a death sentence. Today? The constable sighs and declares that the boy must give the woman 2 days of labor. Feeding her chickens. Fetching her water. She scowls but nods. The boy doesn't flinch. He just pulls his scarf higher and slinks toward her door. Justice, sort of. You glance around. Everyone's pretending not to think about how close they are to the same fate. One more bad night. One more empty barrel. One unlucky sickness. And you could be standing in that boy's boots. And yet, there's an odd sense of community here. As much as people yell and accuse and mutter about goats in the root cellar, they watch each other. They know who's sick. Who's starving. Who's missing a boot. The woman may have shouted about her turnips, but you also know she leaves bread crusts by the chapel door some nights. Just in case someone hungrier walks by. Back home, your mother reminds you to stay out of the Lord's fields. Not because you ever planned to steal, but because desperation has a way of whispering dangerous things into your ear. And the Lord? Oh, he has rules. Endless ones. Don't touch his deer. Don't cut his trees. Don't fish in his pond. You once saw a man whipped for trapping rabbits on land he didn't know belonged to the manor. It was winter. He had 6 kids. You still hear his screams when you close your eyes too hard. There's something cruel about a world where the snow falls evenly, but ownership is invisible. You stare at a frozen river, hungry, and wonder who owns the fish. Who owns the cold? The wind? The turnip frozen to the fence post? But laws are laws. And winter makes people meaner about them. You tend the fire. You mend the coop. You fetch water. You try not to look too long at your neighbor's full root cellar. And when you pass the church, you nod at the priest, who smiles and gives you a piece of dried pear. You eat it slowly, grateful and confused. Because in this world, even kindness feels like a gamble. That night, you sit by the fire and listen to your father tell a story about a nobleman who tried to outlaw snow because it made his boots dirty. Everyone laughs. Your mother rolls her eyes. But you think about it, how rules, even ridiculous ones, have teeth when it's this cold. You reach into your pocket and find a turnip top. The boy from earlier must have dropped it. You place it near the hearth. Maybe it'll sprout. Maybe it's a crime. Maybe it's hope. You sit bolt upright in the dark. Not because you heard something, but because you felt something. A prickle, a presence, a weird shift in the air. The fire hasn't gone out, but the coals pulse dimly like a warning. And then you remember. Tonight is not just any night. It's full of things you can't see. Because winter isn't just cold, it's crawling with superstition. Your grandmother says this is the time when the veil is thinnest, when spirits move through snowdrifts and whisper from frozen trees. She hangs dried herbs in the rafters, muttering protection prayers under her breath as if arguing with the wind. You don't laugh at her. Not anymore. The superstitions aren't just bedtime stories, they're rules, learned the hard way. When your cousin stepped over a horseshoe lying the wrong way, he twisted his ankle the next day. When your uncle forgot to bless the door with ash before the winter solstice, the roof leaked for a month. Coincidence? Maybe. But no one's willing to bet their firewood on maybe. Tonight, the sky is heavy with cloud. The moon hides like it owes you money. Somewhere, a dog howls. You throw on your cloak and step outside, breath curling like smoke. The world is too quiet. Not the usual chickens are asleep quiet. The wrong kind. So you grab a bundle of rowan branches and hang them over the door, rowan sacred, they say. Keeps away that snow hags, those frosty spirits that climb down chimneys and freeze babies with a touch. Your aunt says it's nonsense. But she still hangs the rowan every year. One of the boys down the road once buried a dead apple in the yard to ward off blizzards. His father yelled at him for wasting fruit. 2 days later, the storm veered north. Now everyone buries an apple. Sometimes two, just in case. Your mother whispers charms while stirring the stew, things passed down so long no one knows what they mean anymore. She dips her fingers into salt and touches the threshold, the hearth, the forehead of your baby brother. He giggles. You shiver. Out back, someone's left a turnip with a face carved into it. Not for fun, to trick the spirits. They're supposed to get confused, see the face, think someone's already haunting your house, and leave you alone. You tried making one once. It rotted before the solstice. You had nightmares for a week. You walk past the well and glance down, even though you shouldn't. Wells are liminal spaces. Openings to whatever's under this world. It's said that if you look too long into a winter well, something might look back. You don't want to test that tonight. Inside, your grandmother is boiling something foul-smelling in a pot, a mix of sage, mugwort, garlic, and who knows what. She calls it spirit broth. Not to drink, but to pour at the corners of the house. A sort of liquid go away. You ask her if it works. She just looks at you and says, "You're still here, aren't you?" One of the strangest beliefs around here? That if a rooster crows at night, someone will die before the thaw. It happened once, last year. The rooster crowed at midnight, and 3 days later, old Gerd collapsed face first into his soup. No one eats stew in silence anymore. Historians still argue whether these traditions were deeply held beliefs or simply coping mechanisms. Whether people truly feared snow demons or if it was easier to bury an apple than admit how fragile life was when the world froze around you. But you've lived through enough winters to know the answer is both. There's power in ritual. There's comfort in doing the weird little thing your great-grandmother said kept the wolves away. Even if it's nonsense. Especially if it is. Your brother once swore he saw a pale woman in the woods during a snowstorm. Said she smiled at him and then vanished into the trees. Everyone told him he was dreaming. But that night, every mirror in the house was covered. Just in case. There are rules for this kind of thing. Never whistle indoors in winter, it invites wind spirits. Never sweep after dark, it chases luck out the door. Always burn the first fallen branch after a snowstorm, it resets the balance. And if you spill salt? For the love of all things sacred, throw a pinch over your left shoulder. Not the right. Never the right. Tonight, you sleep with a charm under your pillow, just a knotted piece of red thread. Your grandmother gave it to you when you were small. Said it would protect your dreams. You don't know if it works, but you've never had a nightmare with it nearby. The fire snaps once, loud and sharp, and you jolt upright. Your sister mutters in her sleep. You look around. The herbs sway slightly. The turnip face grins faintly from the sill. The air settles again. You lie back down, your breath slowing. In the medieval winter, superstition isn't silliness. It's survival wrapped in ritual. It's a way to make sense of the cold, the dark, and the unrelenting unknown. And tomorrow? You'll bury another apple. Just in case. The snow is melting. Not quickly, not yet, but enough for the slush to puddle under your boots as you step outside. The wind smells faintly different. Not warm, exactly, but less like teeth gnashing at your cheeks and more like breath. Something stirs in the air. Something fragile, trembling, absurd. Hope. Spring is still weeks away, but today, just today, you can feel it. You trudge past the barn, which still leans like a drunk sailor but hasn't collapsed this winter. That's worth a celebration. Your hands are blistered, your eyes sore from smoke, your patience thin to a thread. But there, beside the fence, poking through a patch of slush, the green shoot. One brave little thing. Unfurling like it doesn't know any better. You kneel beside it and just stare. It's so small. So green. So real. After months of grey skies and greyer meals, it might as well be glowing. Your mother used to say, the first green leaf saves your soul. You thought it was poetry. But now, it feels like fact. Because here's the brutal truth, you made it. You survived the cracked lips, the burst chilblains, the sleep you never quite got, the food you didn't want to eat but had to. You endured the snoring pig, the exploding hearth, the wind that howled like it hated your name. You dodged the turnip trials, whispered to fires, ducked behind charms, and sang to a boar's head like it was your salvation. And now you stand here, shivering still, bones hollowed by the cold, but alive. Historians often marvel at the medieval winter and ask, how did they manage? The answer is simple and awful and beautiful all at once, because they had no choice. You check the food barrels, still echoing. The salted pork has gone soft, and you swear the last onion is growing mold in defiance of God himself. But the hens have started to cluck again. The cow gave a little milk this morning. And when you stepped outside, the world didn't bite. It nudged. The snow has begun to drip from the thatch. A rivulet worms down the eaves and splashes beside your foot. You don't move. You just listen. Drip. 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 It sounds like music. And then, for the first time in what feels like centuries, you hear birds. A pair of sparrows in the hedge, gossiping like old women with secrets too good to keep. You want to cry. Not from sadness. Not from hunger. From the absurd joy of not being frozen solid. Inside, the hearth still burns, but now it's for comfort, not survival. Your sister's braiding wild straw into something decorative. Your father sharpened a hoe this morning, muttering about planting beans. Your grandmother says, don't trust it, it'll snow again, but even she seems lighter. You pick up a pail and head for the well. Not out of desperation. Not because someone's sick. Just because. And on the way, you pass another green thing. 2. Even. A patch of stubborn moss climbing up a stone, as if to say, see? We're still here. So are you. You scoop the water and notice your reflection. You're gaunt, sure. Dirt in every crevice of your hands. But your eyes are open wide. Awake. Like they remember what color looks like. This is how it ends, you realize. Not with fanfare or trumpets. Not with feasts or singing pigs or magic turnips. Just a green leaf in the snow. Just a bird, daring to sing again. Just you, standing, breathing, blinking into the pale, returning light. You ease into your bedding again, but this time, the air is softer. The fire crackles gently, a friendly purr rather than a warning growl. Outside, the snow is still melting, slowly, quietly. The house doesn't creak as much tonight. The wind has forgotten your name. And you? You lie there with the ghost of a smile tugging at the corners of your mouth. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is possible. The worst of the cold is behind you. The long nights, the shivering dawns, the frozen water buckets, the endless stew, all fading now, like a dream you never wanted to remember but can't quite forget. Your body still aches. Your breath still fogs the air. But your heart? It feels a little lighter. Like maybe, just maybe, you'll see the fields turn green again. Watch the lambs wobble out into the morning sun. Hear laughter return to the village square. You curl up tighter, blanket around your shoulders, the scent of ash and wool comforting in its own earthy way. Whatever tomorrow brings, mud, more chores, another snow squall, you'll face it. Because now you know you can. So let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the fire flicker into a soft red glow. Let the night be gentle for once. Sleep deep, traveler. You've earned it. You survived the medieval winter. Sweet dreams.